Hi, this is Paul, and most of you will recognize the guy I'm with today. This is Steve Skojec. I've been following Steve's story for quite a while, and in fact, I met Kale Zelden because of you, Steve.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you had First Peter something,
Yeah,
um,
1 Peter 5.
1 Peter
Was that,
5.
yeah, I spelled it out that way, which confused a bunch of people, but
Yeah, and I read something in there, and it really struck me, and it was by Kale. And I usually don't reach out, but I reached out, and that's how Kale and I became friends. And then he would talk about you, and then I started following your Substack and you on Twitter, and then I really wanted to talk to you because your story's exactly the kind of story that I'm very interested in.
okay.
So,
Well, that's very interesting because he never told me that that was how he met you. I assumed he knew you before.
nope, nope, it was because of you.
All right.
And
Well,
um, and
good to know.
so yeah, let's begin. Those who do you know what do you know about me?
I don't know a whole lot, and I decided to go into this blind because I thought it would be more interesting that way. I mentioned it to Kale this morning, and he's like, "Yeah, just go. You'll have a good time." So I was like, "All right, we'll wing it." I don't know a whole lot. I know you're a pastor of some kind. I know you run a group for misfit toys of some sort, but I don't really know exactly the confines of that. So I thought we would let that come out naturally through the conversation.
We'll let that. Do you have any hard time
No,
constraints or anything?
nope.
No. All right. Well, let's. Who knows how long this is going to go? I have a feeling. I've been watching you and Kale on monitoring the situation, and I love it. I'm really enjoying it. You might see that when I like something, I leave a lot of comments, and a lot of the TLC has sort of followed me in. So we'll see where this goes. But let's
Yeah.
begin how I usually begin these things. Tell me about the home you grew up in.
Okay, so was born in upstate New York, Binghamton area of New York. My dad was in retail management. I'm the oldest of six kids. My dad, being in retail, he got transferred all the time. Um, he went to school to do anthropology, but decided even, he went in the 70s, and he said that even by then, revisionist history was taking over, the field. He decided he didn't think that he could teach honestly, and wound up, with a young pregnant wife, and decided to just do the thing, and was in retail management, and then later in contractor supply and stuff like that forever. So, but the retail thing was important because we moved around constantly. So I kind of had army brat syndrome. Like every 6 months, he would get transferred to a new store, and we'd have to move, even if it wasn't that far away. So I lived a lot around New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. Spent about 8 years in northern Connecticut, in the town of Stafford Springs. That was where sort of the first half of my elementary school happened. And then eventually we ended up moving back to upstate New York, which is where we stayed until I left to go to Texas to finish high school and then on to college. So
And was it a religious household?
yeah. So my parents both grew up Catholic. My mom's family was much more, I would say, devotionally Catholic. My dad's family, his father was the son of Slovak immigrants, and his mother was the daughter of Irish immigrants. And they kind of met in that ethnic melting pot of upstate New York. And they were, I call them Kennedy Catholics. They were culturally Catholic, but like my godparents were, God bless them, but like super on the left, and they voted for every Democrat president, no matter what they believed in. And I remember as I got older and I started being more aware of my own version of the faith, which was much more orthodox, just kind of challenging them. I'm like, what are you doing? you know, but I just kind of accepted it for what it was. But my dad, meeting my mom, he got brought into a much more religiously conservative milieu, I would say. And he kind of progressed over time to being, a much more devout guy.
Hmm.
His dad died when he was really young. My dad was really angry when I was growing up, and that had a lot
Hmm.
of formational influence on me because I kind of wound up being the target of a lot of that anger.
Yeah.
We've come a long way since then, but it took him a long time. It took him until after I was a grown up to kind of start getting that under control. And he was the youngest of 6. So he got the opposite end of it. He got beat up by his older brothers. You know, everybody in the house smoked, even though he was allergic to it. And like, he had a lot of those kind of things that like, you get the chip on your shoulder when you grow up in an environment where you kind of feel like you're always at a disadvantage.
So when his father died, how did his mother manage with 6 kids?
Well, they were all grown. My dad was the youngest. He was in college when his dad, I think he was, or maybe just out of college. I think my dad was 24 when my grandfather died. So he died about a year before I was born.
Okay.
So I never actually met my paternal grandfather.
Was your paternal grandfather blue collar?
Yeah.
Mills,
so
those kind of things?
Well, I mean, he worked multiple jobs. I mean, my dad always said he never really got to know him as well as he would have liked. He worked at a state mental hospital. He worked in a shoe factory, Endicott Johnson Shoe Factory, which was a big industry there in the southern tier of New York for many years. And like, his job was on an assembly line, stretching rubber over the soles of shoes. You know, my dad said his forearms were just massive, you know, because that's all he did all day. Just resistance training, you know. But yeah, like that was the kind of stuff that he did. And then in his free time, he went fishing. And my dad hated fishing for whatever reason, so he didn't really go with him to do that stuff. So, you know, I don't know that his connection to his father was ever nearly as strong as he would have liked.
So did you go to public school?
For most of my education, yeah. I went to the end of 10th grade. Then I started to take my faith more seriously around age 15 or so. I was an altar boy for years and years. And I had the benefit of a particularly pious pastor when I was an adolescent. He was just a really devout and holy guy. Mm-hmm. And we became friendly. You know, I would go over. I worked at the local hardware store when I was 15 or 16, and I would walk over to the parish and have lunch with them. You know, because it was better than hanging out with the guys at the hardware store. So he ended up sending me to World Youth Day in Denver in 1993, I think was the year. And that kind of began to set my feet on a more religious path, even though the experience itself was actually really underwhelming in a number of ways. It also upset me in ways that gave me zeal. There were a lot of strange, unorthodox things that went on during that 1993 World Youth Day. Like they had a woman playing Christ during the live Stations of the Cross. There was all this stuff that went on. And the members of the group who were more inclined to be kind of more conservative, like we all kind of got together and we're like, what is going on here? Like, what, you know, a lot of the priests that came with us were kind of sketchy. Like we just kind of, in fact, the hotel room that I wound up assigned to by the diocese, the other guys in the hotel room ended up letting a producer for Howard Stern's show who came out for World Youth Day stay in our room because there were no rooms available. And I was like, what is going on? The guy was nasty. Like, I was like, the whole experience was very bizarre, right? And the final mass was huge, 300,000 people, John Paul II offering the mass. And it was so hot that people were just collapsing from dehydration. It was like 98 degrees, really, really dry air in, I think it was Cherry Creek Park is where it was. And it's just kind of like the high desert around Denver. And our diocese decided to pull out during the middle of mass. We're like, we're going back to the hotel. And so me and a group of guys were like, we came for this. Like, this is the thing. This is the one thing we get to do with the Pope. We're not leaving. So we ended up having to hike like 15 miles back to the hotel. It was just, but I kind of came out of it with this whole, like, if you want faith to mean something to you, you kind of have to fight for it, sort of a thing. And so I came back and I started being more overtly religious. You know, I would wear shirts to school that had religious messages on them or things like that. And I got picked on, you know, for it. And I started noticing, particularly through, you know, my approach to the sacrament of confession, that during the school year, my confessions were always much different than during the summertime. And it was because I was trying to be accepted. So I was vulgar and I was this and I was that, you know, I was trying to fit in. And then when I wasn't around that pressure, I was much more naturally inclined toward, I would guess you would say, more virtuous behavior. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I doing this? So for my 11th grade year, my mom was already homeschooling all my siblings. I asked to do that. Did not work for me. And then I had an uncle by marriage who had a cousin who was a priest in the Legionaries of Christ. I don't know if you're familiar at all with the Legion. So they were at the time in the 90s, the fastest growing religious order in the Catholic Church. They did a lot of superficial orthodoxy. They wore cassocks, they did Gregorian chant, they did incense and adoration and all these things that I had never seen in the parish life of sort of the post-conciliar world that I grew up in. But they were founded by one of the most monstrous sexual predators in the history of the church, Father Maciel Marcial, a Mexican priest who, they've done there's a documentary on Netflix about him. Like, he refused confession on his deathbed. He refused exorcism. He raped his own children, according to their allegations. Like, he had children with mistresses and then raped them, like, did horrifying things, right? So this order was founded by a cult leader, basically. And I never experienced any of the abuse of that nature that went on in the higher echelons. But it was a very controlling and spiritually abusive environment. But at the time, I didn't know any of that. All I knew is this priest, who was my uncle's cousin, was a really cool guy. He took us on retreats. We went to this apostolic school where the kids all seemed really into their faith and really nice. They were just nice, And I don't know if that's the love bombing part of the cult thing or what it is, but it was very attractive to me as a young man looking for meaning and purpose, and in many respects looking for sort of surrogate father figures, because my relationship with my own father was so difficult.
Yeah.
And these priests, like, I had been raised to just treat priests like, they were Christ himself. And so they had a sense of mission and purpose, and they involved me at a leadership level and all this kind of stuff. So I felt very engaged by this and like, okay, I have some mission to my life. So when that priest that I knew in upstate New York got transferred to Texas, he invited me to come out and do a summer camp, because they had a boarding school at the time for Mexican boys. He's like, we need counselors. Why don't you come out? So I went out to do that. They ended up closing the boarding school because the Mexican peso had crashed right around that time, and they had to consolidate schools. But I asked them, can I stay here and finish school? I had met a guy, actually it was this priest's nephew, and we instantly became best friends. And I didn't have close friends in public school. And then homeschool, I lost any connection that I had. And this guy, like, the first day we met, we just hit it off, and we couldn't shut up. We couldn't stop talking. We went out to Fort Worth, and like, his mom and the priest were brother and sister, so they were talking, and we just were like bonding. Like, I just never had a friendship like that. And I was like, I got to come back here, right? So I asked them, and they were like, well, we have this whole boarding school that we're not using anymore. You're welcome to come and live with us as long as, you help us out with the work that we need to do around here. So I did my senior year of high school at the Highland School in Irving, Texas, which is run by the Legion, still is. And then I went on from there to, they had a volunteer program that was kind of based on Mormon missionary work, where they go and they give their 2 years. So they called it the coworker program, go give a year. So I went and volunteered at a House of Apostolate. They sent me to Atlanta, Georgia. I taught in a school there. I did youth group stuff. I did all this stuff. And then there was a lot of vocational pressure. They wanted me to become a priest, and I didn't want to, and kind of a long story, but I ended up deciding to part ways with them at that point, at which point they attacked my reputation and tried to destroy all my relationships with everybody that I knew that it was within the movement and all this kind of stuff. So I ended up going to Franciscan University of Steubenville a year late, coming out of this pressure cooker of vocational pressure and discernment and all this kind of stuff. And so then I ended up doing the rest of my education there.
There's so much I want to ask you about. So I'm Protestant, and I was out of the country from 1990 to 1997 because I was in the Dominican Republic. I was a missionary with my denomination in the Dominican Republic. So there's a lot of the history of the 90s in America that I just missed because I was, there wasn't the internet really.
Right, yeah.
And so I was just, the whole Clinton, I missed almost all of that. Talk to me. Well, I'm really curious about the vocational thing because I'm not surprised that when we'll leave the whole cult thing to the side, but often if you're a young man and it's very clear from your behavior that you're devout, you're pious, you're interested, you're motivated, there will be, people will begin suggesting that you go obviously into the priesthood. Now, obviously for Protestants, it's a little different because, you can have a girl and
Yeah.
become a minister.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big step in the Roman Catholic Church. So talk to me about what you were thinking in terms of vocation. Did you think about the priesthood? Did you?
I mean, I've always been, I never had a cootie phase with girls. I've always found women just magnetic, right? And, 5, 6 years old, I'm pointing out the attractive women to my mom, it's just who I was for whatever reason. And so that was the hardest thing for me to wrap my mind around, because I was getting the exact kind of pressure that you're mentioning.
Yep.
My pastor would say things like, well, if you like ice cream, it means you have a vocation. Like, he would just try to come up with stuff, which was really funny, but he was never pushy in that way. Whereas, the guys in the Legion would tell me, no, I know you have a vocation. I know it. And so I wound up in this conflict between what I actually want is marriage and family.
Yeah.
And what you're telling me God wants is something else. And God has a kind of a storied history of asking people to do things they don't want. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah. And it's heroic. As a young man, that's super appealing, that heroism.
There were things about it that were appealing, for sure. Especially when I'm with this dynamic religious order that travels all over the country. I did door-to-door missionary evangelization in 5 different countries or whatever. I did a bunch of this stuff, and it gets you super engaged and really zealous about your faith.
Yeah.
And then somebody uses that to kind of pivot you to, well, you're supposed to be a priest, and like you're already kind of on the slippery slope, and you're like, am I? Am I really? Fortunately for me at the time, I was still in love with a girl, and I couldn't get over that. And so they eventually were like, okay, fine, we're just going to kind of let off the pressure a little bit, but keep considering,
Yeah.
And then what wound up happening that was really weird is, so I came home for Christmas in 1995. No, it would have been 96. Sorry, I graduated in 96. So it would have been Christmas of 1996. And we had a new pastor at our parish. I'd never met him before. And I was, my parents were kind of in the habit of going to Mass every day, and I went with them. And he came out after Mass and he said to me, can I talk to you for a minute? I was like, yeah, sure. It was very high comfort level with priests. It didn't weird me out or anything. And he's like, I want to take you out to breakfast. There's some stuff I want to talk to you about. I'm like, okay. So we go out to breakfast and we just kind of get to know each other a little bit. And then I kind of start mentioning, like, I'm suffering from serious vocational anxiety. Like, I'm a very obsessive person. I now have found out recently I'm pretty likely on the autism spectrum. There's stuff that, like, once it gets in me, I can't let go until I work out the resolution.
Yep.
And so I was just driving myself insane trying to discern, because I was like, this isn't what I want, but what if it's what I'm supposed to do? And I just ping pong back and forth between those two things.
Right.
And it was just making me sick. And so I brought this up to him, and he's like, I'm really glad you brought this up, because that's the thing I wanted to talk to you about. And I don't know how to explain it to people who don't necessarily have these weird religious impulses, but he's like, God was telling me that I needed to talk to you about this and to tell you you need to get out. And I was like, really?
Get out of what?
Get out of the Legion. Get away from them. Get away from the order that, because I was supposed to go back after Christmas to finish the year. I was teaching 7th and 8th grade religion at a private school. I was very involved, and I was just home for break, and then I was supposed to go back. And he's like, you got to get out.
Wow.
And it felt so correct that I was like, you know what? Yeah, I think I do. And so I went home that day. I wrote a letter. I faxed it to them, because in those days, that's what you did, is you faxed things. And I kind of like just sort of let it go. And what I didn't know is that they began a whisper campaign immediately and started like contacting everybody I knew. So the legionaries are a priestly order, but they also have a lay movement called Regnum Christi. They get together for Bible study. They do a bunch of different stuff. They have these commitments that they have to do. So that's sort of their lay movement. And I was, well, at least according to them, they lied a lot, so who knows. I was the first young men's Regnum Christi captain in the North American territory. So I was recruiting people. I was doing all this kind of stuff, right? So anyway, I was supposed to go back. He told me not to. I told them. They started telling everybody I knew within that lay movement, oh, Steve's not generous. He gave up on his vocation. He did all the, whatever it was that they were telling him. And my friends were calling me saying, do you know what they just said to me about you? Luckily I had good friends and they all stood up for me.
Yeah.
But I mean, they contacted my girlfriend's mother. They contacted literally everybody. It was like they just were trying to sever me from the entire network. And I basically wrote them a letter saying, it's not you, it's me. I was like, I'm anxious. I can't deal with this. I need to take some time to sort this out. I wasn't like crapping on them at all. I was just like, I need to figure out me. But they must have known. I don't know what happened. So they kind of turned it into a war. And what was interesting is I go to Steubenville the next year, and so many people I knew from inside that movement were also starting college at the same time. And I didn't know they were all going there. I didn't. So they had a heavy presence on campus. And I ended up spending much of the next 4 years combating their influence over the campus there and kind of trying to rescue people from the techniques that they would use to pressure people into joining. But that is all part and parcel with the whole vocational question. I mean, I spent my entire 4 years in college trying to deconstruct, was I supposed to be a priest? Did I screw this up? Did I not? I still remained very religious, very devout. I went to mass pretty much every day when I was at school. I was really trying to figure it out because I wanted to do the right thing. But ultimately, just over time, it just became clearer and clearer to me, like, this is not what you're meant to do. You know it. It's why you're fighting it so hard. So I kind of moved beyond it.
Talk to me about at least your corner of Catholicism in the late 80s, early 90s. Because, again, looking from the outside, of course, John Paul, even today, I have more contact with Catholics now than I've ever had in my life before because of the YouTube thing and friendship with Kale and other Roman Catholics. But even I could tell, looking from, the hinterlands, that John Paul II was a really big deal. And especially in terms of the Reagan years and the collapse of the Soviet Union. And so it just, and even today when I listen to people, I mean, John Paul and then Benedict, these were like, these were for some people the church will not be defeated by Vatican II. These are the people that are going to put the church on the... So what did that look like to you as a young man who was obviously, very devout, very serious, and someone who obviously was sort of being recruited by certain elements of the church?
Well, I mean, what's weird about it is I think that he was elected in 78. I don't remember the year. But I was born in 77, so he's the only pope I knew. Like, I was technically alive, I think, during the pontificate of Paul VI, but I was too young to know anything else. And I think his papacy lasted like 26 years. So, I mean, for my entire life, he was emblematic of the papacy for me. So I didn't have anything to contrast it against. My parents are young boomers. My mom actually might technically be old Gen X because she was born in 58. I don't know where the cutoff is.
No, the cutoff is 65. Although a lot of boomers slice 45 to 55 and 55 to 65. Okay. I was born in 63. So
my mom was born in 58 and my dad was born in 52. So my dad remembered like the old mass and the way things were before Vatican II. My mom didn't really have that as much. I mean, I think she had some because the change really happened in 69. But I mean, when you're a kid, I don't know how much of that you really take in. And so, my family kind of was interesting because they had the old mentality in many ways. Like they brought a lot of, I got a lot of the Irish Catholic guilt. I got a lot of the older ways of looking at things. The seriousness of like Catholic is the one true faith. If you leave it, you have more responsibility than somebody who never joins it in the first place. Like all this kind of stuff. Right. So there's a lot of those sorts of pressures. My mom was big into the lives of the saints, and a lot of that stuff can be very overwhelming. Current day Steve, I think a lot of those people were probably a little mentally ill because of the level to which they took their obsession with the faith, but we hold them up as the examples, the exemplars for how you live a devout and holy life. So, but back then I didn't have any context for any of that, right? So I'm just growing up with it, and John Paul II is like my big Catholic grandpa in Rome. Like that's what it felt like. Everybody who was Catholic at all, even in my generation, loved him, like just loved him. Later I looked back and I was like, he was a very good man, but a bad pope in terms of governance of the church. He just didn't govern the church. He let a lot of problems go unresolved. I mean, part of the reason why Maciel, the founder of the Legion, who was this horrible predator, got away with it for so long is because John Paul II believed in him and gave him cover. Because he just kept saying, he was very proud of what the Legion was doing because superficially they looked incredible. And it's what drew so many good people in. He used the good people that he drew in as sort of the meat shield for his horrific personal agenda. And it was extremely effective because you recruit these people in who are obedience-minded, who are docile, who will, listen to their spiritual director and do whatever they say. So it affords you an enormous amount of control over a group of people. So John Paul II let a lot of things like that happen while not really governing, while not really dealing with the liturgical crisis that happened after Vatican II. He asked for the people who still wanted the Latin Mass to have it, but there was no teeth in it. And so the bishops were like, no, you're not the bishop of my diocese, I am. So he never made things happen, but he did live by a kind of personal example that was really impressive to anybody who followed him. So did I answer that question?
Yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah.
So talk to me about, now it's interesting because I've heard, again, I'm looking over the fence from Protestant land, and it's like the big spires are the ones that you see. So Steubenville is something that I hear about. There's a college there. It seems to be again one of these hot spots that for the last few decades has produced a lot of Catholic leadership, Catholic energy. Talk to me a little bit about that.
So when I was coming up through high school, there was a known kind of crisis in Catholic education. People would say you go to places like Notre Dame to lose your faith. Like a lot of the big name Catholic schools, Georgetown, anything Jesuit associated problem. Notre Dame had problems. Father Richard McBride was based out of Georgetown. He was one of the most public and noteworthy liberal leftist, clerics in America. There was just a lot of this kind of, you go there and you come out a different person spiritually than how you come in, and not in a good way from the perspective of where I was coming from. So at the time, there were 4 big Catholic colleges, not even big, but 4 that were considered really orthodox. There was Franciscan University of Steubenville. There was Christendom College in Virginia. There was Thomas Aquinas College in California. And then I think University of Dallas was generally considered the 4th one. And, University of Dallas is a generic name, but it's actually a Catholic school. And it was also right next door to where I went to school in Texas at the Highlands. Like I went over to UD all the time because we basically shared a forest between us and you could just walk back and forth. So I wanted to specialize, and Thomas Aquinas and Christendom were both just one liberal arts program. That's it. Like that's all you get. I wanted to concentrate on a major. And so having had the experience of UD that I had, I didn't really want to go back there. So Franciscan sort of just became my default choice. Now, what Franciscan's actually known for is being kind of the heart of the charismatic movement within Catholicism in America. And during the 80s and up into the 90s, like it was big on charismatic stuff, which didn't appeal to me at all. I'm a much more, I don't know what the right word is, but that's not my spirituality at all. But I had friends who were going there, and I liked what I saw about the program. And honestly, I just went sight unseen. I just kind of took it on faith of like, I need to make a choice. Originally, I planned on going for psychology. They had a good psychology program. So I kind of threw a dart and was like, let's go, and that's what I did. Now there are more schools in America that have kind of risen under this banner of dynamic orthodoxy is what they call it. There's like
that might have to get rebranded if the Orthodox get bigger.
Like Belmont Abbey in North Carolina, Benedictine, I think somewhere out in Kansas. Like there's a few more schools now. Ave Maria came up, like that became a school while I was at Steubenville, and they were actually poaching some of our professors. Best history professor I had left and went to Ave Maria. So, it became kind of a cottage industry of like Catholic families are having lots of kids. They want good schools. They don't want their kids to lose their faith when they go get a Catholic education.
Yep.
We need more of this. And so, but I started college in 1997 and finished in 2001. So during that time period, there just wasn't a lot of other games in town.
So what did you study? What was your major?
So I ended up switching my first week to communication arts with a concentration on radio and television production. And then by my sophomore year, I added a theology degree because I had a lot of electives because I managed to pass out of my language requirement, which freed up a whole bunch of credits that I was going to have to otherwise take. So I was taking theology as electives so much that I was like, man, it's not going to take that much extra effort to just make it a double major. So that's what I did.
So I'm a third generation minister in the Christian Reformed Church of North America, which you could be forgiven for never having heard of. It's a denomination that has tended to plant itself in areas of Dutch immigration in the 19th century. It is we have a high. The denomination likes doing Christian day schools. They're not parochial schools. They're parent run, not church owned. And then we have certain colleges, but one college is special, Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, sort of at the heart of the Christian Reformed Church. I'm a third generation minister. My grandfather, both of my parents, and my wife and I both went to Calvin College, now University. And especially when I was going, I graduated high school in 81. So the years I went to Calvin, it was still the old immigrant container was still more or less intact. And so one of the big roles of Calvin College was you would go there to find a mate because you would have more selection in the Christian Reformed Church if you went to Calvin College and found a spouse than anywhere else. And especially eventually went to seminary, was going to go to Fuller in California, but decided to go to Calvin because I had met someone my fifth senior year taking Greek because I was also working through vocational issues during college.
At Steubenville, they called that, for the women at least, getting your MRS degree.
That was exactly the language at Calvin. So, talk to me about your social life at Steubenville.
So it was great. I mean, I'm kind of an interesting, paradoxical person in terms of personality. I'm technically, and I only found this out because I took Jordan Peterson's personality test. I'm 82% extroverted, but in many respects, I live like an introvert. And there are reasons for that are psychological. There are reasons for that are, neurological. But Steubenville was like a great environment for me in a lot of respects because I had a strong personality and the ratio of girls to guys was 4 or 5 to 1. So it was a highly female population.
Whoa!
Yeah. I thought the same thing. I'm like, I'm going to find somebody here if I'm going to find somebody anywhere, which didn't happen. But I also had a strong cohort, though, of friends from my days with the Legion who were all getting out of their assignments and going to Steubenville. I mean, I probably knew a dozen people my first day of school, which you just don't normally have when you go off to college, right?
Yeah.
And we formed this kind of power block. And even though most of them were still involved and I wasn't, and we argued about it a lot, like we were still friends, Some of these people are godparents of my children today. So we kind of formed this block. Like when we went to the cafeteria, we took the big tables, like we would get together, we would talk. And so we formed this coherent social unit that other people glommed onto really, really fast. And so we came in as freshmen, but we could have been seniors because we kind of ran the place. That was just sort of how it was because we knew so many people and so many other people wanted to be part of that group because we were fun. So it worked out great in that respect. I would say that college, my greatest value from going to Steubenville was not the education, it was the other people. Yeah. Particularly for what I majored in. At the time, the communication arts department there was terrible. I didn't research it. I just made an impulsive switch because since I had been a kid, I loved making media. That was my thing. I had a boombox and I made radio shows. I would borrow camcorders from anybody in the family who had one and make little movies. Like that was my thing. I didn't realize how underfunded and anemic that department was until I started going through it, and even then I didn't know how bad it was until I graduated and tried getting a job. I remember going to this small town media company and they were like, "Do you have a demo reel?" And I'm like, "What's that?" I didn't even know what a demo reel was, right? And they're like, the guy pulls out DVDs and he goes, "This is what kids in the local high school are submitting." And I was like, "Oh, I'm toast. Like, I don't know how to do any of this stuff." I mean, we were editing video on like reel to reel, like 2 SVHS decks. But I did get some good experience. Like I had a radio show, I was the floor manager for Franciscan University Presents, which is an internationally broadcast panel discussion show that's on EWTN. We made a couple of our own shows in college, and the guy who put those together wound up going on to be an independent film director of some notoriety. He's got stuff on Netflix. And so, I mean, I got some good experiences. They just were predominantly not through the official course of education.
Yeah.
But the greater thing is that, I had friendships going in that were further cemented by the experiences I had there. And then through those, I made other friendships that have lasted to this day. So to me, that was the value. Was it worth what I ended up having to pay for it? That's a hard thing to put a number on, right? Yeah. Because I graduated with a lot of debt, but socially, I mean, very, very active. But I was still getting over vocational pressure. I was still getting over the girl that I had been so deeply in love with, and it just didn't work out. Like I knew it wasn't going to work out between us, but it was just like we went from being together constantly to no contact ever again. Like never talked to her again.
She wasn't at Steubenville.
No, she was not at Steubenville. Okay. No, she ended up going, I think, somewhere else. So I dated girls, but just nothing clicked. Just, the longest relationship I had was a few weeks, and it just, nothing really worked out. And I was like, what am I doing wrong? Like, I don't understand what I'm missing. I was fairly popular, but the connections weren't there that I was looking for. So I had a great time. Not a lot of luck in love.
All right. So you leave college, and what do you do? Do you go home? Do you get a first job somewhere? So this is where
things kind of get interesting. So
things have been very interesting already. So you're doing well. It's going to get more interesting.
So I had this kind of nascent obsession with Japan. I've always been kind of a xenophile. Like I like exotic things and interesting cultures, and I grew up in a really small town, and it was boring. And, I grew up on comic books and science fiction and all the like big imagination stuff. And so I really loved the idea of the foreign and the strange and things like that. And Japanese culture was bleeding heavily into American culture during my childhood. I mean, a lot of the cartoons I watched were originally from Japan. In college, some of my friends got me into anime, and I really enjoyed the series. Just the more and more that I got exposed to Asian culture, the more fascinated I was. And I was like, I want to go there. I want to see what it's like. I got to travel a lot. I've road tripped all across the US, Canada, and Mexico. I had a European semester in 1999 where I got to travel to a whole bunch of countries there. But Asia was just like a whole other world. And so I applied to teach English in Japan so that I had a reason to go. And I didn't want to go alone because you need a wingman when you're in a foreign country like that, that's as foreign as it is. And I was like, I'm girl crazy. I think that girls are beautiful. Like I need a guy who has my back and reminds me who I am, and vice versa. So my buddy Tony and I both applied to go teach over there together. And he was on an education track. So I thought, oh, he'll get it, no problem. But they offered me the job and not him.
Huh.
And I never understood why. But I just kind of was like, I'm not doing this by myself. It's as it is, it would be very difficult to be a Catholic in a country like Japan where it's such a minority population. But then on top of it, it's just so foreign. Like I need somebody I know. And so I just decided at the last minute I wasn't going to do it. And he said, well, I'm going to go. He was from Detroit. And he didn't want to go home. I was from upstate New York. There were no jobs there. So he's like, I'm going to go with our buddy Eddie, who we live with. He's getting an apartment with 2 of his brothers in Phoenix. Do you want to come? And I was like, no, but I will. Like, I didn't want to go to Phoenix. I had no desire to go to Phoenix. The only time I had ever been through Phoenix was on a previous road trip where I had sun poisoning from being on the beaches of California all day with no sunscreen because I was an idiot 19-year-old. and body surfing literally 12 hours with no sunscreen. I was so sick. And then we drove through Phoenix, and it was 100 and God knows how many degrees, and the AC went out on his truck, and so I had blisters all over my shoulders, sick as a dog. I was like, I don't want to go back there. but I went, and then within 2 months I ended up meeting the woman who I would marry later on. So it was this weirdly interesting series of coincidences. Some of them get personal, so I won't go into all of them, but there was a very strong feeling I had that this was providence, like Japan not working out, me getting there, her having just had to leave her job. We wind up both working at a place that neither one of us belonged at. Then 9/11 happened. And so this is what's really interesting is we both were working for the phone company. That was where we met. And I hated it. It was dishonest. It was sales. It was telemarketing, sales type stuff. It was 100% not me. And I didn't feel like I could be honest and do it. And I was talking to the people who were hitting their numbers. And one guy, I remember him telling me, he's like, I have to drink at night because I can't live with myself for what I have to do. And I was like, this is not the right environment for me. Like, I am compulsively honest. I can't do this. So I quit my job, just quit because I'm impulsive. And I was like, I'll just find another one. So I had other stuff lined up, and then boom, 9/11 happens and nobody's hiring. And I had this job interview that I had lined up. And I remember I did one of those things where you give God an ultimatum. And I was like, look, I don't know if I'm supposed to be here. I'm kind of in a relationship with this girl, but I don't know if she's into me or not. She's got a kid. Everything's complicated. Like, I don't really know what I want to do. I was like, so if I don't get this job, I'm taking that as a sign that it's time to pack it up and go back and start over. And then, of course, 9/11 happens. I talked to the company. They're like, we were really interested in you, but we don't know where the economy's going. We're freezing all hiring. Like, nothing's happening. So I was like, okay, that's it. That's my sign. So everything I owned fit in the back of my old Pontiac station wagon. So I packed it all up. My buddy comes back from California that same weekend. He just proposed to his girlfriend, one of the guys I was living with. So he's about to start his whole new life. And I'm like, well, that's awesome. I'm out. And they were like, what? And I was like, yeah, I'm going home. So I drove back home to live with my parents and try to figure out what was next. And she ended up coming out to visit me like a month later and loved it out there and decided to move out and stay. Now, there's more in that story than I can get into for personal reasons, but she had kind of what seemed to be a sort of miraculous conversion while she was out there. I brought her.
So she wasn't Catholic when she was in Phoenix.
She was not. No, I was teaching her about it, and she was interested.
Were you going to mass regularly, weekly?
I was. Yeah.
Okay.
She grew up. Her parents are both from China.
Okay.
Her dad was a nominal, like, just Confucian. You know, he didn't really believe in religion. He kind of just had a vague sense that somebody up there was looking out for him. That was kind of his thing. And her mom was a Chinese Baptist. But she didn't even know if she'd ever been baptized or anything like that. She just really wasn't sure. And she grew up in the slums of South Tucson. Her parents were basically slumlords, and it was a rough area, a lot of crime. You know, she got involved with some bad people for a while and things like that. So when she came out the other side of it, she was looking for something. She had strong belief. She had an innate spiritual sense. But she didn't have anything specific. But again, South Tucson is like Mexico. Like, you go to the San Javier del Bac mission in South Tucson, and the signs all switch to Spanish, and they're all in kilometers, not miles, because you're not that far from Nogales, and then you're across the border. And so she grew up around Mexican Catholic culture, so she was very familiar with sort of the cultural trappings of Catholicism. And she told me, you know, like I said, she had a very strong spiritual sense. So she would always go to the mission because the sacred grounds, like, she always felt safer from kind of spiritual forces that were dark when she was there. So she had that innate sense.
Yeah.
So when she came out to visit, and I took her to see my priest friend, and through circumstances that are deeper than I can get into because it's not fully my story to tell, she had kind of a miraculous conversion that day, and then decided to go home, get her daughter, come back out, and move out to the East Coast because she loved it. She hated the desert. She always wanted to leave. And so she moved out there, and then she wound up getting a job in DC after she couldn't find anything because, again, upstate New York, no good jobs. And then I followed her down there, and we got married there 2 years later. So that was kind of how that wound up happening. I don't remember how we got down.
Very providential.
Yeah. So a lot of the things that happened there felt deeply providential. And if I could get into more, the coincidences are so strong that it's like I had total conviction that God led me to her.
Yeah.
And later that would come back to bite me.
So you get married, you're working outside of DC. What kind of job are you working outside of DC?
So with my majors, it was really hard to find the right kinds of jobs. And, around my senior year of college, I really started becoming a writer. I'd always written since I was a little kid. I wrote stories to keep myself entertained. I mean, I always did stuff like that. I think I won my first all-school writing contest in the 5th grade. It just kind of progressed as a thing that I liked to do. But I thought I wanted to be an actor or something. Like, I didn't know what I wanted. And then during my European semester, I started writing a travel log and emailing it home. And it was weird because in those days, this was 1999, but where we were in Austria, they didn't have good internet access. And so what you would have to do is you'd go to the computer lab, you'd type something up in Microsoft Word, you'd put the email address at the top, save it on a disk, give it to a lab assistant, and then in the hour or two of time that they had allotted for internet, they would send everybody's emails. Like it was like, courier pigeons or something. I don't even know what it was, right? So I wasn't having a lot of kind of direct real-time interaction like we have now with people.
Yeah.
So I'm sending these things home to my mom, and I don't realize she's sending them to everybody that she knows. So I come back from Austria, and I basically walk through a room of people clapping, because they're like, wow, those were so good. Like I felt like I was there.
It was a pre-blog.
Yeah, exactly. It was a pre-blog. And so that kind of got me thinking. And then my senior year of college, so I went my junior year into Austria. Senior year, I wound up picking up a column in the school newspaper, and it became pretty popular. And I started realizing, this is really what I'm best at.
Yeah.
But what do I do with that in terms of work? Who knows, right? So, I got little jobs. Like I had before I moved to DC, when I was still in New York, I got a job at a consulting firm with a family friend who was doing business consulting, and I wound up doing mostly copywriting for him. And again, there was this guy who founded this anti-drug organization. It was a nonprofit. He was an electrician, just a blue-collar guy, but his son, 19 years old, died of an OxyContin overdose at a party. It was the first time he'd ever taken it, as far as anybody knew, and he had too much, and he died. And so this guy was on a crusade, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't know how to write. He's just a blue-collar guy, just didn't have it. And so I was given the job of writing his story for the website. So I'm 23, I'm a few years older than his son.
Yeah.
And I sit down and I write this thing.
Yeah.
And I send it to him for review. And I remember he walks into the office and he just looks at me. He's like, how? How can you say things I don't even know how to say? It's like you're inside my head. Like, how did you do that? It was almost like I was a wizard, and he was really suspicious of my supernatural power. But that moment always stuck with me as that was the first time I really knew, this is your calling. You can do this. And it's almost magical. And I don't know how it works, but it's a profound feeling when somebody, the most important thing to them, you handled it with such precision and care that they feel like you spoke what they couldn't say.
Yep.
There's nothing better than that.
Yep.
So I kept trying to chase that feeling. And it was, how do you find a job doing that? And those times I had no idea how to pursue it. So when I got to DC, the first real good job that I got there was at a PR firm. And I was doing media analysis, but they kind of back-channeled me because they realized I was a writer into doing, they called it new media at the time, that we all call social media now, just 2006. But they kind of back-channeled me into doing ghostwriting for corporate executives on blogs, like General Motors, top global executives.
Yep.
I was writing for those guys.
Because everybody needed to have a blog, and these execs aren't going to write it, so
yeah, they're not going to write it themselves. So I would try to read things that they had said, emulate their voice, write a post, I had no training on this at all. And then I would send it to them for their approval, and then we'd put it up, and so but it would be like that was 10% of the work that I was doing. They wanted me to be a pitch man, and I'm like, I don't want to be a pitch man. I don't want to call up journalists. I don't want to, like, that's not my thing. I hate being on the phone. I just don't even want to do that. But, like, I would read the news every single day, and everything that came up about our client in the news that was negative, I would write a summary of all of it, and then we'd get together and sit down at a table with a lot of very intimidating people. Let's just put it, my immediate boss was appointed by President Bill Clinton to, I believe, be the press secretary of NASA.
Wow.
His boss was the Washington bureau chief for CNN for 20 years. Like, these are the caliber of people I'm working. I'm working with, strategists who advise presidents, and they would leave our office and go to the White House. So, like, it was high level stuff, and I don't know how I found myself there, right? And I would sit down at a table with all these people every morning and tell them the most important thing they needed to know. Here are the stories where our client is getting trashed that we need to address. And they were trusting that, and I was good at it, but I mean, it's kind of where I honed my nose for stories.
Yep.
And it's funny because at the time it just felt trivial and kind of pedantic and repetitive, and like, what am I doing? Like, I'm reading the news looking for bad news. Like, what?
Yep.
But all those things kind of add up over time into a skill set. But it just, one thing after another, I never built a career. I would look for opportunities to do what I was good at, and I would wedge in as much of that as I could into a job. So I continued on in that vein, and it's a very jumpy history until my last office job that I had. I was the director of community relations for the Society for Technical Communication. So it's an industry association for people who do technical documentation. So the people who write manuals for products, the people who, some of it dealt with, user interface, user experience, but it was mostly like they documented stuff. If you get a manual with any product that you buy, a technical communicator wrote that for you. And we were their industry association. And so I was set up to manage a relationship problem that they had with their chapters and special interest groups, because headquarters were nonprofit people and technical communicators were very spurgy, like difficult to deal with, highly intelligent, but like grumpy people, many of them. And so I was kind of put in the position of, can you liaise between us and them and begin to mend this relationship? It's a 60-year-old organization. And like, there's a lot of tension between, the membership and HQ. And I did, like, because I know how to communicate and I know how to build relationships and bridge gaps. And I had a great time there. But by the time I had been there for 3 years, there was kind of a coup to knock out the executive director, who was my champion and the one who hired me. I tried to get the position of director of communications because I wanted that on my title so that I could get more jobs like that. They wouldn't give it to me. The whole organization was in flux. And at that time, my wife, who has been in real estate for 23 years, was killing it at real estate. And she kept asking me to take time off because she's like, I got to go to inspection. I got to go to a closing. I was like, how about I just quit this ship before it goes under, which it didn't, thank God. But I thought it might. And I was like, how about I quit? I come home. You're making enough money for both of us right now. I'll help with the kids. I'll help with your marketing, copy, and all the graphic design and all that kind of stuff. And it was during that time when I was at home that I ended up starting 1 Peter 5.
Okay. Talk to me about your church life in D.C. I did a conference, an estuary conference in D.C., and I'd been to D.C. as a kid, but when I went to this conference was organized by a couple of Catholics in the corner, and I got to D.C. and I had no idea. You had the shrine to John Paul II. You had this enormous basilica, and it was like, I'd been to D.C. before to see all of the government buildings, but my goodness, I stayed in a Capuchin monastery. That's where they put me up. So it was, I've had some really wonderful introductions to certain parts of this massive Catholic world that I knew nothing about. So what was church like for you in DC?
So there was an interesting sort of side story going on during all of this stuff, which is my family, my extended family was very oriented around things like liturgical and theological orthodoxy. So when we would all get together, my mom's twin sister and her husband had 10 kids. They had a big house. Everybody would go over to their house for barbecues and family events and things like that. And that was where all the women would get together and talk, and the guys would sit around the table and they would talk about church and politics. Like, that was how it was. And I was kind of alone. So on my mom's side of the family, my mom is one of 8. I believe there are 35 or 36 grandchildren. I was the second oldest, but the oldest one, my cousin Joe, he was never really involved in the faith. He was never really involved in the family. He was kind of on his own. So I was sort of like, if there could be a grandchild patriarch, that was sort of me. And everybody was years younger than me. Like, the next person was 2 years younger. The next person was 3 years younger. So I didn't have cousins to play with or anything like that. So what I wound up doing is sitting with the men. And I realized that my entree to the men's table and the men's world was to understand and talk about these topics. So I got into talk radio, and I started, reading more about the faith. And at the time, I didn't really have internet, but I had local bulletin board systems that I would log onto, and I would argue with atheists about religion, kind of like we do in the comments on Twitter now, So it's like I sort of honed that in the early 90s. And I realized, like, the more I knew, the more I got to talk with the men, and I got to feel like I was one of them. So it was my path to acceptance and all that kind of stuff. So there was this constant feeling of tension. My uncle, the one whose house we were at, my Uncle Chris, he owned a construction company, and he traveled a lot for work. He went to jobs, and he would always try to go to mass in the morning before he started work. And he would come back with these horror stories about the liturgies that he went to, and just how weird they were and how crazy they were and all this kind of stuff. So we all, as a family, kind of gravitated towards the most reverent form of the masses that we could find. And because Vatican II kind of shattered the rigidity, it was a crapshoot. I always called it liturgical roulette. Like, you just never knew what you were going to get. Spin the wheel and see what you're going to run into. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's terrible. Maybe there's weirdos dancing on the altar. You don't know what's happening, right? So in my personal life, I kind of had this programming of, like, keep seeking more reverence, keep seeking better liturgy, keep seeking a more transcendent experience. And so I would never, after a while, I just stopped going to the parishes that were closest to me. I would go to whatever was in the area where I felt like I was going to get that. And over time, that ended up leading me to the traditional Latin Mass, which was the pre-Vatican II liturgy. But it took a long time to get there. Like, I didn't get there in 1 or 2 steps. I was very resistant to it. I very much believed in the church project. And so I remember my cousin was a diocesan priest. He's an older cousin. He's closer to my mom's age. But he joined the priesthood late. And I think he was ordained to the priesthood right around the same time that I was either going into or graduating from college. So we would get together and we would talk. And I was the only one in the family who was, like, really into theology. So we'd get together, family get-togethers, and we would talk. And he would tell me, he's like, man, he's like, I have to do this mass, this liturgy. And he's like, I look in the book and I'm pretty sure this prayer is heretical. Like, I can't say this. But he's like, it's the only option that I have. And he was raised with a father who went to the seminary, who was very theologically astute. Yeah. So, like, he kind of had it ingrained in him from a young age.
So for a Protestant, when he says he's looking in the book, who put that book in his hands, and who put the stuff in the book?
The Roman Catholic Church. It's the missal. It's the missal of Paul VI. It's the missal of 1969 or 1970, whichever, and so they put these prayers in, and on any given day they have to say these prayers. But he would see these prayers and he'd be like, this is not theologically correct. Like, there was this really profound liberalizing influence in the church. And in the late, I think it was in the mid to late 2000s, I'd have to look it up. It was Monsignor Andrew Wadsworth with the International Committee for English and the Liturgy led a complete revision of these texts because there were so many problems in them. But they kind of it was a free-for-all after Vatican II. Like, stuff just went into a blender. You could go and get inclusive language and God is a woman and all. Like, it just really depended on the priest. Like, it really depended on what the priest's personal theology was the kind of mass that you would get. there was a lot of room for improvisation and all this kind of stuff. But that was a comment that kind of stuck out to me, was he said that. And he's like, do you know anything about the old Mass? And I was like, not really. I was like, I've been once or twice and I hated it. Honestly, I didn't have any idea what was going on. I don't speak Latin. I don't know any of this stuff. And he's like, you should check this thing out. And so he told me a couple of things I should look at. And one of them was this document called the Ottaviani Intervention. It's named after Cardinal Alfredo Ottaviani, who was the former, so the name keeps changing. I forget what it is now. It was the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Now it's, I think, the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith. But in the old days, it was called the Holy Office. It's where the Inquisition was based out of. Like it was the doctrinal watchdog office for the church. And Ottaviani had led it for many years. And when the new Mass draft came out, he wrote this treatise on, basically, he and another cardinal named Bacci. They just analyzed it and they said, I forget the exact phrase, but it's something along the lines of, the theology of the new order of the Mass is a striking departure from the traditional theology of the liturgy. And he went through and just diagrammed like all the things that were wrong. So my cousin, who was a priest, a young priest at that time, or new priest, I should say, he said, you should go read this. And me, mister, I have a theology degree and, I'm going to reconcile all the things. I was like, there's no way that this is going to convince me. So I had the gall to grab a red pen and sit down with this document. I'm like, I'm going to mark this up. I'm going to go back and talk to him. I made it like 3 paragraphs into the thing and I threw the pen and I was like, he's right about everything. Like, this is everything I've been complaining about. And I didn't know that it was structural. I didn't know that it was built into this thing. That all these problems that he's addressing are because, they changed this prayer to say that, and they changed this to do that. And so then down the line, what you wind up with is the manifestation of the pedagogy that goes into the liturgy. So over the next couple of years, I moved in the direction of doing the Latin Mass. So by 2004, my then wife and I, and at the time it was just my stepdaughter, we didn't have any kids of our marriage yet. We started going to the Latin Mass every Sunday, and we never stopped. So for us, initially liturgy in DC was going to what's called the Novus Ordo, which I think you're familiar with that terminology, but just, the current...
Which is hilarious because it's a Latin word for an English Mass, but,
Well, it's because it's the Novus Ordo Missae, the new order of Mass, because the Vetus Ordo, the old order, got kicked to the curb. We've replaced your liturgy with decaf.
But they had to use a Latin name for it. They couldn't have said the English Mass. That would have communicated.
Well, you have to read John the 23rd's Apostolic Constitution Veterum Sapientia on the suitability of the Latin language for theological expression, because it gives rise to no cultural preferences, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
So, as Kale says, sacrum, sacrum, sacrum. So, did you read sacrum, sacrum, sacrum? So anyway, just that progression of more and more conservative masses, tried out the Byzantine liturgy, tried everything I could, found this very much a Western kind of spirituality, much more analytical, much more theological, less mystical. I was attracted to it once I started understanding what it was. My first couple of attempts that I went to that thing, man, I bounced off of it. Because the priest is facing the altar. You can't hear half of what he's saying. It's all in Latin anyway. I didn't have a missal to follow along. I hated it. The first time I went, I hated it. And it actually took my wife to turn me on that. We were still dating at the time, but as a new convert, we had just finished Mass at this parish that we were going to. And then there was a Latin Mass in the afternoon. It kind of gets stuck at the last thing. And it was starting while we were still in the church, kind of doing our prayers afterward and stuff. And I started telling her, oh, this is how the Mass used to be, da-da-da-da-da, kind of treating it like it was a relic.
Yeah.
And her attention was just fixated on what was going on at the altar. And she goes, no. She's like, that is what Mass is supposed to be like. Like she just knew it in her soul. And that more than anything kind of reoriented my willingness to consider it, because for somebody who didn't know anything about it, had never been exposed to it before, to have such a strong magnetic attraction to it, I was like, there's something here. And maybe I've just been conditioned not to see it. So over time, that's kind of what I came to. So long answer is, we started by going to like Latin Novus Ordo's done in Latin, facing the altar, like the most reverent that we could get. We got married in one of those. But by a year or two later, we were just going to the old mass. And we did that for the next 17 years.
And then kids start coming along.
Mm-hmm.
She's doing real estate, so she's making better money. And those are good years to do real estate. I mean, you got the crash in 2008, but real estate in a lot of places. DC's, again, one of those areas. I grew up outside of New York City.
Yeah.
And so,
DC never experienced the crash the way everybody else did.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of back and forth to Arizona, where she's from. Like, we moved back and forth several times. So there's a lot of that gets too complicated. But
yeah, that's okay.
We did a lot of back and forth moving, kind of trying, just, you're trying to find your place. You're trying to find real estate you can afford. DC was extremely expensive. At the time we first moved back to Arizona, it was affordable to buy a house there still. And then they experienced the largest explosion of value right after we got there. And then it crashed. So like the first house we bought, we lost in foreclosure because it went up in value $150,000 in 6 months and then tanked below what we paid it for.
That's
what we paid for. And at the meantime, the new home builders, who are wildly overcommitted to building thousands of new homes in the fastest growing city in the country, which Phoenix was at the time, they're offering massive incentives to undercut the resale market. So as a resale agent, you can't sell anything.
Yeah.
They're like, we'll give you $80,000 of free upgrades if you'll buy a house with us instead of buying somebody's old house, and it's like you can't compete with that. Yeah. So that was happening right around 2005, 2006. So we were in Arizona for a while there. After we were initially in the DC area, we went back to Arizona, and then we came back. So we did that a couple of times for different reasons. We did it again later because her dad got sick. There are reasons why we kind of toggled back and forth between the two places. But yeah, so she was doing real estate and I was doing whatever I could.
Yeah. Was that a lot of, because you've got blogging starts. So talk to me about 1 Peter 5, what prompted you to do that and what that was about for you.
Okay. So my senior thesis in college, interestingly, was about media and the new evangelization with a hyphen. So this was 2001. Blogging hadn't become a thing yet, but I had a sense of first of all, it was the fusion of my two majors, communication arts and theology. Secondly, I just had this feeling that like technology and the internet were going to enable a different form of evangelization that we hadn't seen yet. And I was trying to kind of figure out the pattern that I was sniffing out. And I didn't know what form it was going to take, but I was already approaching the issue. So that's 2001. 2003 is when blogging really starts to kind of take off. You start seeing the platforms like Movable Type and Blogger and things like that. Amy Wellborn starts becoming popular around this time. There's a few others. Mark Shea, I don't know what the heck happened to that guy, but he became very, very popular in the Catholic blogosphere. And so I started out just kind of with my own and commenting on theirs, and it was like this really early community of Catholic bloggers. A couple of years later, some friends and I started this web ring, back when web rings were a thing.
Yeah, I remember those.
Called the League of Evil Traditionalists. And the whole thing was, it was a joke on anytime you told anybody you were into like the traditional liturgy, they would treat you like you were some kind of weirdo, It's like some kind of... So we're like, well, if you're going to treat us like we're evil, why don't we just take it and run with it? And we kind of made it into a snarky joke, right? So we did that for a while. And then I had a friend who became the editor for Crisis Magazine. Are you familiar with Crisis Magazine?
Little bit. I've seen.
Okay, so it was a significant, it's less so now, I think, but in the 90s and 2000s, a very, very significant Catholic magazine publication. So this friend who I had met doing missionary work became the editor there. And I was like, hey, could I write for you? And he was like, nope. Like, I hadn't reached the level of skill, And I remember around 2008, I was like, I was inspired by William Gibson, who said that, the reason why he has been a successful novelist in his view is because he spends the time the average person spends watching television working on his novels. He's like, that's it. That's the secret to my success. So I was like, I have these different hobbies that I do, like I play video games or I do this or that. How about I put that energy into my writing and really try to make it better? So it would have been 2007, because in January of 2008, I wrote my first article for Crisis Magazine because they solicited me. My friend who said no to me initially came back 6 months later, and he was like, "You're writing really good stuff, and we'd like to invite you to be a columnist." So I did that for a couple of years. I ended up moving over and then writing for CatholicVote.org. It's a big Catholic political advocacy organization here in America that they do a lot of organized voter campaigns for Catholics, but they also just kind of try to educate and inform people on the issues, the religious bleeding into the political kind of a thing. So I wrote for them for a couple of years, and then I ended up writing the biggest post by traffic they ever had, probably around 2013 or so. It was like 300,000 views the first day. It wound up on the Drudge Report, like all this stuff. And I was like, why am I doing this for $50 a post? Why don't I do this for me, right? So I had accumulated enough experience writing for Beer Money to be like, what if I just took everything that I've learned from PR, from the time I worked doing web design, from the time I worked doing this, like all this patchwork career that I didn't really have? What if I borrowed from all those buckets, put it all into one, and made a website that was about the Catholic things that I think are the most important? And it was largely inspired by the election of Pope Francis, who, for reasons that I've never been able to adequately explain, the first time I saw him walk out onto the loggia to be announced as a new pope, I was struck with a visceral feeling of dread that was so powerful. The only way I could describe it, the thought that came unbidden to my mind, is that is a demon in a meat suit. That was the thought that I had. And I had no basis for it. I had never heard of him. Yeah. I didn't know anything about him. It was just something in his demeanor, like something in his face, something preternatural. I don't know what it was. I was not even in a really great place in my faith at that time, but I just remember watching it and going, ugh, like I felt sick to my stomach. And then later I started seeing other people saying they had the exact same reaction. And I was like, what's behind that? So I waited for like 6 months before I said anything. I was like, let's give him a chance because I don't want to be rash here. And he kept doing stuff that I was like, I don't like that. So I wrote this piece in October of probably 2013 called "It Doesn't Take a Rigorist," because somebody had said I was a rigorist for having any criticisms of Pope Francis in a Facebook thread. I was like, it doesn't take a rigorist to see that there's a problem here. And I wrote this critique, and it was very specific. I don't even remember what I wrote at this point. It's been 13 years, but it blew up. Like I had a little blog. It was my personal blog. I wasn't putting it on Catholic Vote. I wasn't putting it anywhere else. I had my own personal that almost nobody read. And it exploded. I had like 10,000 views on the post within the first week. And then I'm getting phone calls from the New York Times and from like NBC News. They want to interview me because here's this guy who's criticizing the new pope and everybody loves him. And who would do such a thing, right? So I do a couple of these interviews and then I'm like, I got to stop. Like, I don't want this to be my reputation as being the guy who's doing this. This is never, I was considered myself a papist. Like that was the thing to be proud of. But I felt really strongly there was something there. So after those initial reactions, I took some time and I thought about it. And I was like, people don't see this guy for who he is. And I don't know why I do, but it's when they see it, it's going to mess them up. And I had this image of like a storm coming. There was that old movie Twister. You know, there's the one scene in the movie and they're holding on to like the bar out in the yard and the wind is like pulling them up in the air and they're holding on. I wanted to create that bar that went into the ground and be like, when this storm blows through, I want you to have something to hold on to because you remembered something I said before it got that bad. And that was kind of my whole goal, which you could say is arrogant, but it was like, it felt like a calling. I couldn't get it out of my head. I couldn't stop thinking about it. And the name, you know, I know it's 1 Peter 5, but I have a tendency to read, when I'm reading something, I read it literally. So I would see 1 Peter 5 and I would think 1 Peter 5, right? And what was going on at the time is I had little boys who, my son Ivan in particular was having nightmares at night. And so I had found an online copy of the old breviary, the Liturgy of the Hours that priests would pray. And in the night prayers, there was a citation of 1 Peter 5, 8-9. which says, brothers, be sober and watch, for your adversary, the devil, goeth about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And then the response is, whom resist ye strong in faith, right? So we would pray these prayers together every night to kind of try to help him with his nightmares. But it was in my head because for whatever reason, the other prayers in night prayers would change a little bit, but that was always the anchor piece. And so I was like, that's what people need, like, because there's a roaring lion prowling around. And so in order to kind of make it different and kind of contemporary, I went with my literal reading of 1 Peter 5, and that's why I called it that. And I think a lot of people who were more scripturally immersed were like, what are you doing? They probably thought I was stupid and I didn't know. But and so I founded it in August of 2014. And the first month, like, it just exploded. I didn't advertise it. What I did do is I grabbed a bunch of writers who I knew had some cachet, and I said, hey, I'm doing this project. Are you willing to write a piece for the introductory, edition of this? So I got Michael Brennan Doherty. I don't know if you know him. He's a senior writer for National Review. We were kind of friends. He'd been to dinner at my house. I had John C. Wright, who is a science fiction writer who famously converted to Catholicism about a decade before that. And I had him, he wrote this piece called Faith and Works in a Science Fictional Universe, which was just great. It was about how science fiction and faith can work together. Dr. Peter Kwasniewski is one of the founding members of Wyoming Catholic College, like people that I had been introduced to through my network. And I was just like, are you willing to volunteer a post? Because this is the thing that I'm trying to do. And it just went gangbusters. And I didn't expect it to do that. I just was like, I just felt so strongly that this is the moment and this is the thing and this is what it's called and this is what the logo should look like. Like it all just kind of was almost not me. It was like coming from somewhere else. And I just put all the pieces together. And when I did, it took off. And the next 7 years of my life, that's what it was about.
Did it, I pay attention to times because, it doesn't take a rigorous as 2013. So you are already into the social media environment. There's already Facebook. So things can go viral in a new way from a personal blog, from a nobody, and you can get lift you can get status lift through social media. What was the business side of 1 Peter 5 like for you? Was it advertising? Did it go well business-wise, or was it just something that...
It went well business-wise, not initially. I mean, in the first year, we almost lost our house. Our van got repoed one night when I was sitting at my desk and I saw the tow truck pulling it up the road. It was not great because real estate at that point had kind of taken a little bit of a turn, and we were both trying to balance taking care of the kids and working. And so it was tough, and it became very all consuming very quickly for me. But
partly because of who you are.
Yeah. Because once, like, if I find something that is like my thing,
yeah,
it pulls me in and I can't stop. I don't know how. I don't have a middle gear.
Yeah.
And it's both a strength and a liability.
Yeah.
In any number of reasons. So, we had an initial investment that turned us into a nonprofit. A foundation came to us and they were like, we want to give you 10 grand. But in order for you to receive it, because we're a nonprofit, you have to also be a nonprofit so that we can make this donation in kind.
Yep.
So we converted over to being a nonprofit early on. And then that became the model, is begging for donations, which has upsides and downsides, as you know. So the first year and a half were lean. And then after that, it just kept getting better. And then I was able to afford to pay people instead of just asking them to do things for free. Now, there were a lot of writers who wrote for us for free because they weren't writers. So my approach from the very beginning was, the skill of writing is one thing. Having a story that's worth telling is another.
Yep.
I've got the skill of writing.
Yeah.
What I need from you is your story. And if you give me a good story, I'll make it pretty. I'll get your sign off on it because I've done ghostwriting before, and I'll put it out there. So I took a lot of people who never would have gotten published anywhere else, and I put a byline under their thing, and I put their stuff out there, and I made it good. I made it presentable, but what they had, the core thing that they had, was good. So there were a lot of volunteer writers over the years who weren't asking for anything. which made it a lot easier to manage. But there was, it was a low overhead business. But it was the first time, at that point, 2014, I'd been married for 11 years. It was the first time I could actually act as the sole provider for my family, where we didn't both have to work.
Yeah.
Because we had just been struggling and struggling and struggling the whole time. And when the income finally picked up, it was like, now finally we can breathe.
Yeah. Now, a little bit earlier, I didn't want to interrupt you. You'd said something you just sort of dropped. When my faith wasn't strong, what was for you the thermometer by which you judged whether your faith was strong or not at any given point?
It's such a difficult thing, and in retrospect, I have even more questions about whether, what do we mean when we say we have faith?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like for me, and my dad, I think, was always very much the same way. It's primarily intellectual. I can't say that, I've ever felt on any sustained basis, like any kind of closeness to God. I can't say that I've ever really put a gun to my head, say, oh yeah, I know God loves me. Like that, I knew I was supposed to believe it, and I did my best to hold up to that, but did I feel it? Did I perceive it? Like, did I really feel it deep down? I don't know. One of the things that was always attractive to me about Catholicism was the depth of the intellectual tradition behind it. Mm-hmm. In college, I wasn't drawn towards exegesis and scriptural studies. I was drawn towards systematics because, like, to me, the system made the universe kind of make sense. There was an answer for everything. Like, just being able to go somewhere and say, oh, this is what the church teaches about that. I know what I have to do. I know what I have to believe. The buck doesn't even slow down with me. You don't like what I'm saying? I got that from them, right? Like, I loved that system of structure. I had a chaotic life. I grew up in a chaotic home. My dad's anger, my mom's disorganization and absent-mindedness, and she was an artist and just kind of like all over the place, forgot everything. It was a kind of a very cluttered way of growing up, and just everything externally felt chaotic, and internally, my mind, my thoughts were always a million miles a minute. I couldn't calm them down. Like, the worst thing that I had to do was go out and mow our huge lawn with the push mower for 2 hours because I couldn't shut off my brain, and it just wouldn't leave me alone. So any kind of structure that I could impose that made things make sense, like, that was comforting to me. But I also I'm cradle Catholic. Like, I didn't have a moment of conversion. I didn't have a moment of reversion. I didn't have a moment where I abandoned it and then came back. Like, from the time I was 2 years old and could speak any kind of words, I was able to say prayers. And I was like, it was always the backdrop of everything. And from a very young age, it was, you don't question this. Like, you don't question it, you don't abandon it, you don't leave it. You just, this is the truth. It is the truth of truths, mm-hmm. and you stick with it, right? So despite being very intelligent and having the capacity to have an otherwise critical mind, I couldn't look at the church critically. But there were times when my doubts would surface more than other times. There were times when I would feel so frustrated with my experience of the faith that I could feel myself pulling back. Your sins change, like everything changes depending on how much you're feeling like you're tight with God or not. And so there was that period of time there around the time when Francis was elected where I was feeling like I was drifting away. I was feeling like I was having a hard time caring. And, it's not a secret because I write about it, that I'm in the middle of a separation and divorce, but my marriage, being led to a marriage that felt so providential in the beginning, I was so sure that God called me to it. And then it was like, okay, well, you're on your own now, and it's going to suck from here on out, and you're going to fight constantly, and you're going to struggle financially, and nothing's ever going to work, and no matter how much you pray, you're always going to feel like you're just fighting an uphill battle. Yeah. That wore me down over time. More than anything else, I would say that is the number one thing that eventually made me be like, I don't know if you're even there because you don't care. No matter how much I ask, you don't help. I did this thing. I put you first, and it's not getting better. And I want it to because I love her. Yeah. And she loves me. But, like, why is it so hard every single day? And so that feeling of being led into a trap grew and grew over time. And that definitely always played a huge role when I would have those lapses. But then what happens is when you have the lapse, the doubts you've been suppressing through the active force of the will, which, by the way, I mean, I don't know what it's like for you and when you talked to your people, but like I would go into the confessional and talk about struggling with faith, and the priest was like, you can't even entertain those thoughts. Like, you just have to push them out of your mind. That's the devil. You don't even give those thoughts any quarter at all, right? And I remember, like, as I progressed through the 1 Peter 5 years, and I was looking into the darkness that was in the church every day, and I wouldn't tell the priests who I was. Sometimes they knew, but they would say things like, well, you just can't read the news about the church. And I'm like, so just stick my head in the sand, because that's going to make it better. If the thing that's threatening my faith is knowing what's actually going on, I should just ignore what's actually going on. Does that seem intellectually honest to you? But you can't always say that in the context of a confession. But I just remember feeling like that's so dishonest. I can't do that. I already know that it's wrong, and you want me to just pretend I don't know? So what I find is that when that feeling of like I'm trying to be close to God and I'm trying to live out my faith gets weakened by whatever's going on in life, the doubts would begin to kind of push their way up because I wasn't managing them anymore. So yeah, it's, and I always suspected there was something preternatural going on. I didn't really know. Like, it's easy to just be like, it's the devil.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes it is. I don't know. Yeah. But I mean, I've had weird stuff that I've experienced. I worked for a priest who was a borderline exorcist, and I saw some things, and I don't know how to explain any of it. I didn't experience them directly, but I watched other people go through it, and I'm like, that was real. I don't know what it was, but that was real. So I don't know. It's a weird thing to try to explain.
You're clearly a passionate person. You're clearly someone who loves the adventure of a mission. And because, we can talk in cog-sci terms about a flow state. And especially a vocation like writing. Writing is for many writers, I always say there's kind of two kinds of writers. There's sort of vomiters and twiddlers. But I think they get into their flow state with one or the other, and it's just it's a flow state. To what degree for you is the experience of faith associated with a flow state?
That's an interesting question. And I don't have a ready answer for it. I can tell you that you're right, about writing, at least as I experience it, but I would even take it a step deeper. It's very difficult to get to that place. And one of the challenges for me, having a large family, having 7 kids at home, and I just constantly got interrupted.
Oh, yes.
Constantly got interrupted. And my wife too, because my wife is a multitasker, right? So
Yep.
I always used to joke and call her the Kool-Aid man, because I'd be in the middle of writing something and she'd just burst in and be like, hey, what do you know about this thing that we need to take care of? And I'd be like, dude, you just killed it. Like, I don't know where it went. It's gone. And she would just be like, psh. And I was like, yeah, you may be able to have 50,000 tabs open at once, but I can't. Like, that's not how I work. So when I get past the level of superficial distraction and awareness that I'm hungry, or awareness of the temperature in the room, or whatever the things are that are embodied that are obstacles to that, and I get to that flow state, it's more than that. It's like I'm channeling something and I don't know where it comes from.
Yeah.
And it's very strange. And I didn't realize that until I started reading all this stuff. And there's a show I want to do with Kale about the human download. So many creative people over the centuries have said that, like, when they are in that zone, they feel like what they have is coming from outside of them somewhere, and they don't even know where. And it gets repeated over and over and over again. And so as I've read more and more of that, I'm like, that is what it's like. I don't know where it's coming from. I didn't plan out this essay I sat down to write. I had an idea. I had a sentence or two, or maybe a paragraph. And then the rest, it comes out. Where's the reserve that those words are coming? I don't know. So that is almost a religious experience.
Yes.
when it comes to faith, man, I may have touched on that a couple of times. There's a thing that Catholics will sometimes do. St. Ignatius of Loyola, founded the Jesuits, and the Jesuits started this practice of the Ignatian spiritual exercises. And one of the things that they do after spiritual exercises retreat is do a general confession, like all the sins of your whole life. Like, don't just do what you did in the last 2 weeks. Try to think of everything you've ever done and confess it all at once. It's like a spiritual enema. Like it is a very purging and cleansing kind of thing. And I remember I did that once when I was with the Legion, and I felt this zeal that was just crazy afterward, right? So there were moments I can think of where I kind of touched that, but I've always felt like there's some kind of wall between me and God that I don't really know how to get past. And part of it, I think, and I don't know how far to go down this road, but one of the things I concluded when I left Catholicism was that the church kind of can't stop getting in the way of your relationship with God to such a degree that it becomes an idol in and of itself. Mm-hmm. Because God is intangible, because he's imperceptible to me, at least. Mm-hmm. Then the church becomes the proxy. Mm-hmm. But that means that the church begins to be the experience of God that you have. Mm-hmm. God himself is not. And when the church does a lot of stupid crap, then your relationship with God can get poisoned by that because you can't see him through that filter, or at least I can't. Mm-hmm.
So you're doing this blog, Substack comes along, and Substack is really God's gift to bloggers about 15 years too late.
Yeah.
Where you can actually receive money from people pretty directly. But I pick up on you a little bit because I had read, I don't even remember how, I'd been reading Rod Dreher. I started reading Dreher probably in the early teens, back when he was with the American Conservative. Mm-hmm. I think I got Rod Dreher through a friend of mine on CRC Voices, which is a listserv. That tells you how old I am. I remember these listservs.
Yeah.
And he had posted something about, and it was a beautiful thing that Rod, he might have, something that he'd written about his sister or something, because Rod has these different modes. Yeah. And what my favorite Rod mode is when he is talking about, his family, his story. I mean, that's my favorite Rod. There are other Rods that I have more complex relationships with. But it was probably through Rod that I had picked up on Kale's piece. And at that point, I'd already started monkeying around on YouTube, and this whole thing that I've been at had already gone underway. But, and then of course you start to pop up, and because Rod mentions you, and then I first find you on Twitter, and I don't know what it is about a pastor, but there's something, it's sort of our spidey sense when there's a collapse somewhere, because as a pastor over a flock, there's just too many of them, and so you just have to sort of scan.
But you notice when one of them's sick, yeah.
Right. You see a pattern stray, and it's like you got to pay attention to that. And so that's where you really came up on my radar, because for me, for a variety of reasons, I've been a pastor watching sort of the unraveling of the faith of a lot of people, because I'm at the end of the boomer, I'm just a little before Xers, and I was right at that cusp of this. In Protestant lands, you have the seeker movement, then you have the emerging church movement, where so much of what you described is just, that's right there in the emerging church movement, and you have just
like Kale always says, all the bodies are buried in the mid-century. Man.
Yeah. So you first come on my radar screen because, I start this in a local church, and probably what happened was I have that same that pattern recognition, but I'm doing it now on Twitter and YouTube, and so when I see someone start to come apart, part of me is like, pay attention, and so I just watch, because
it's funny you mentioned Rod. Rod knew before anybody knew. Rod and I are not close. Like, we correspond now. In fact, Rod and I have met each other multiple times, and he doesn't remember this. But I mean, the first, like, early 2000s, I remember him emailing me about and talking to me about his, forthcoming book, Crunchy Cons, before that ever came out. So I don't know what year that was, but it was like probably 2004. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we've crossed paths. We've never met in person, but he keeps rediscovering my work because he reads so many people.
Right.
And in 2018, he reached out to me like I'd never heard from him before. And he's like, "You're going to lose your faith." He's like, "You got to like pay attention to what is going on, because I am reading your writing and all I am seeing is what I was experiencing back in 2002 when I was covering the sex abuse crisis. Like, your disillusionment, your disenchantment, like you're going to lose your faith if you don't do something to stop it."
Wow.
And I found it so crazy incisive because I was just starting to kind of realize, well, I'm in trouble because I feel it slipping and I'm trying to hold on to it. And it's like, I can't reassure myself anymore. And a lot of it was because I felt like part of my job was to reassure all the people who were worried about what was going on in the church. Hey, God's got you. He's going to take care of you.
Yeah, you wanted to be that pole and twister.
Yeah. And so what I wound up feeling was, oh, that's not anchored to anything. That thing never got like cemented into the ground. You know, the overwhelming feeling I started getting, and it was in 2018 specifically, a lot of stuff was going on, but I went back and looked, and I had like 9 articles that I wrote that year for 1 Peter 5, where I was basically like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if God's going to show up. We're kind of all on our own. Like, you know, I didn't say it that explicitly, but it was there in the text. And I think that was what Rod saw, and he was like, it's coming for you.
Yeah.
He's like, I've been there. Be careful. And I was like, but it still took me anyway.
Yeah. I've spoken with and watched even more people who have lost their faith. I'm not surprised Rod could spot it. There is the predominant element. Most people see the anger. Most people see the hurt.
What's the most visible?
Right. But what I often see is the grieving. It's a death of something inside that is precious. And I've watched people lose their faith who it was like a death of a parent or a child or a spouse, because
it's your identity.
It is. They did not want it to die, but no matter what they tried and what they did, they couldn't not lose it.
That was one of the most infuriating things that I would run into with so many people online is, you know, they would say, you know, you abandoned it. And I'm like, I didn't choose this. I begged God not to let it go. I knew what the consequences would be. I was running a publication with millions of readers. If I left, like, what was that going to do to them? What's it going to do to my kids? Like, what is it going to do to everything? I mean, I went from, you know, in 5 years, it was, I lost my faith. Then I became estranged from, you know, a number of members of my family over some internal family politics that were really messy. I lost my ability to provide because I had built this business, which in and of itself was great, but I thought I was never going to do anything else. Now I'm this incredibly cancelable guy who's written all this stuff online that there's no making the internet go away. Like, people look you up. You know, I'm not getting another job in a normal place ever again. Like, it's never happening.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I lost my ability to make money. I'm hitting middle age. I'm realizing I've got childhood trauma I never dealt with, and it's manifested in a bunch of behaviors that I want to get rid of from my life. Yeah. And then I find out I'm on the spectrum, and I'm like, now I got to figure out what that means in terms of my capacity to change. How much of this is just my neurotype, you know? And then my wife's like, hey, I don't want to be married anymore. And I'm just like, it's been one death after another to the point where I'm just like, what's left?
Yeah.
I don't even know. So the grief, man, it's so real.
Yeah.
But I didn't even get to recover from the previous ones before another one would hit. It was like they were spaced out every year or so. Yeah. And so, you know, I said something the other day. I don't know if I wrote it in one of my posts or if I put it on Twitter, but I said something along the lines of, you know, I'm trying to choose to believe that everything happens for a reason, despite my difficulties with faith, because if not, then this is just a meaningless kick in the nuts from the universe. Like, what? Yeah. Why? Why is this all happening systematically, methodically? to the point where now, and why am I dealing with it alone? I live in a city where I don't know anybody but my wife and kids, and I see my kids a couple hours a week if I'm lucky, and that's it. That my human contact is reduced to, people cashiers at grocery stores or whatever. Like there's, I have stuff like this. Kale is kind of my lifeline to sanity because we do our show once a week.
Yeah.
But that's like the only real conversation I get to have with anybody at all while I'm going through this. And so the grief is overwhelming. So you're 100% right. And I feel like it's got to be true for most people.
Yeah.
And I remember my wife asking me in 2017, she said, why do you keep doing this, running 1 Peter 5, when it makes you so miserable? And I was like, well, first of all, I didn't think it made me miserable. It felt to me like it was the culmination of everything I had ever done. Like all my experiences finally melded together. I thought I was where I was supposed to be. But she saw that it was negative and that it was having this effect on me, like all the negativity that I was immersed in because I was covering corruption, basically. All the time, which wasn't what I went in to do. It was what I wound up doing because I felt like, well, nobody's going to talk about this the way that I will. And so I saw it as sort of a watchdog kind of a thing, It was trying to protect something I love by trying to pull the infection out of it. So I took a few days with her question, and I came back and I said, I think it's because I'm not actually trying to protect the church. I'm trying to protect me. This is my identity. Like I have been Steve the Catholic. Like that has been the first thing on my resume everywhere I've gone for so long. That was the thing that gave me acceptance growing up. That was the thing that made me feel like I had value and mission and purpose. And it's like, if I don't protect that, then what happens to me? And I don't think people realize that when they say, oh, you can't lose your faith. No, you can, and you can have it happen to you against your will. I didn't want it. My life would be so much better and easier if it hadn't happened.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I'm not going to say that there's no upside. There is something about being locked into that rigid framework where you can't think outside, you can't color outside the lines. I remember watching Jordan Peterson do the first episode of his biblical series. And the thing that struck me, I mean, what he was saying was fascinating, but more than anything else, the thing that struck me was the freedom to just say, this is what I think it means, and not have 1,000 people jump down his throat and call him a heretic because he made some pedantic mistake about, what Sacrum said about that, particular passage of the scriptures. And it was like, it was the freedom to explore and to have intellectual curiosity and to interpret and to say, this is what I think this is. I never lived within that milieu. It was always stay inside the lines, do this. You're a heretic if you do that, and it's like, and in trad world, in the traditional Catholic world, man, it's like the Gestapo. I had to turn off comments eventually because I just got so sick of all the fighting in the comments. Everybody's got to nitpick everybody else more to show that they're more orthodox. Stop. Small o, but stop. Yeah.
So I've walked through men before with this journey. You're out. You're in a shitty apartment, not too far away. You're probably driving. You were middle class, so you probably had a family vehicle that could hold all the kids, and then you had this little beater that you used for the second car. That's the one you get. Now, suddenly, to whatever degree you can earn any money beyond the basic necessities in your shitty apartment and to put food in your mouth, that has to go to the wife and the kids and the family. You get to come home and be this, in the sight of your children, this almost ghost, weird-ass stranger, because the kids have no idea what happened. And each one of those kids is going to have their own particular journey through this, loosely based on fragments of truth that they can sort of figure out and will continue to unravel and try to figure out for the rest of their lives, frankly. And you know this and they don't. And again, I'm not saying this to blame your wife, because in my experience, while we do have agency in these matters, as you just said, with respect to the loss of your faith, what happens is that agency is often limited because things take on a life of their own, and suddenly everyone is a victim of the combinatory explosiveness of that circumstance. And so now you, oh gosh, got to lean into that Substack. I'm going to be, working in the gig economy, which, as I read your one of your last blogs, has its benefits, and because in a sense, being a person without that identity is liberating. When you're standing there at the checkout counter, chances are nobody there knows anything about 1 Peter 5. Nobody there cares about the traditional Latin Mass. Nobody there cares about anything. They've all got their connections to how many different weird little strands that somehow tie them to history. And you work in a gig, and then through this strange thing called the internet, you can maintain friendships with someone like Kale and maybe some other people in your life, and you'll continue to mine your tragedy, because one of the things that in fact does sell as well as religion, if not better, if this is different from religion, is that everybody has a tragedy of some sort that's in their lives or their parents' lives or somewhere, and in a sense, all of us with tragedy, maybe at least we can sort of be together in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, so for me, it's writing about it is the, excuse me, the most effective way to metabolize grief. I am an externalizer. That's how I work. Like, in my head, the thoughts are a jumble. So I have to get them out. And so, if you are, depending on who you are and how you like your interactions with me, if you're around me all the time, you're going to kind of get probably a lot of verbalization, because that's how I deal with things, is to talk it out, right? If I don't have anybody to talk it out with, I write it out. And that's how I understand what I think, is I put it out there and I read it and I'm like, is that true? Is that not? Does that explain it? Is there some connection between these things that I didn't see until I put it down? So there's that. It's funny, there's a Reddit thread out there somewhere about how I'm just trauma dumping. But it's like, for me, it's like, this is so overwhelming. It has to have somewhere to go.
Yep.
And I also know there are the people who just want to rubberneck at the train wreck, right?
Yep.
Those people exist.
Yep.
But I also know,
and some of them will pay, which is a good thing.
Exactly. And I also know, though, because I hear from other people, and they tend to be the people who don't comment as much publicly. I've gone through this, and I can't believe, like, you're articulating this experience in a way I don't know how. Going back to that first job I had where I wrote that thing for the guy who lost his son. If people are able to see themselves in it, and it provides them any recognition or comfort, there's a value in that. Because, I don't, right now, I don't know how to give people something that's valuable to them, because I'm drowning.
Yeah.
And so it's like I said in my last one, like, I don't want to be self-indulgent. That isn't the point. It's just that, like, when this is what occupies your thoughts every waking moment, and everything you do is either to distract yourself from it or to try to figure out how to deal with it. Like, I don't know how to talk about a lot of other stuff right now. Sometimes I just don't write at all, because I'm like, if I write today, it's just going to be a crap show.
Yeah.
But it's like, I want to be able to have that solidarity with those people. And I can't say that it, in any kind of absolute terms, it makes it better to get those emails from people and they tell what they've been through.
Yeah.
But it is always better to know you're not alone than to think that you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't really take away another person's pain by telling them, I understand this and here's why. but there's something about sharing in it that means something.
Yeah. Well, the chaplain at Calvin when I was there, Dale Cooper, used to have a great line that would often come up in his sermons, which was pain shared is pain divided. And there's a lot of truth to that. It's the pain doesn't go away.
Yeah.
But it's divided. And at least if you can sit at a table where at least you look around the table and other people know, and part of you knows that other people know. It is trauma bonding. I get that. Fair enough. But I'll tell you, sometimes that's all you got. And if that's all you got, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's
you got to watch it because of that. But
no, you're right. I mean, but the problem is, and I know I've written about this. It feels like a betrayal of the magnitude of the situation to try to dance around it. You know, when we lose someone through death, you know, particularly if there's a long illness or if there's a tragedy involved, it's not an expected death. Somebody died in a car accident or some horrible thing happened. Like, you're expected to grieve for a while. Yeah. How do you grieve somebody who's still alive and lives 20 minutes away and won't talk to you at all about the situation?
Yep.
You know, how do you grieve children you're still trying to love and be in their lives, but it's like you have to somehow emotionally detach yourself from them to a sufficient degree that you can function.
Yeah.
Because the fact that you're not seeing them every day and that you're worried about what this is doing to them, you don't have any control over that. And so if you agonize about it all the time, it's crippling and you can't do anything at all.
Yeah.
But you feel like you're betraying them when you pull back and say, I have to wall that off a little bit because there's nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Like, and especially as a man, when you feel like it's my job to protect them.
Yeah.
I can't fight the enemy.
Yeah.
There's no enemy to fight here.
Yeah.
And even if I did, you know, I'm not going to fight their mother in a way that's even more dangerous. I mean, the whole reason why we're in this situation is because we couldn't stop fighting.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know, I'm sure they are relieved that the fighting has stopped, but none of them wanted their father to go in order to get there. I think there needed to be another path.
Yeah.
But that path was closed and I didn't vote for that choice. And so it's like, well, here I am. So now how do I relate to them in a way that is meaningful to them when I am away from them 99% of the time, where I show up as a visitor who has to go home in a life that we built together. And I'm just like, my kids didn't want me to leave. They're not afraid of me, you know? And it's like, so when I get there, they all run and hug me. And it's like, it's not like, oh crap, dad's around, we got to be on eggshells like that. I don't feel that at all.
Yeah.
I don't think any of them know how to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's like, and, you know, and I have a range, you know, my oldest children at home are 19 and 20. My youngest children at home, the one just turned 5 and the other is 10.
Wow.
So it's like, I've still got little kids who don't understand it at all. And for whom this has been extremely difficult. And there have been, you know, big crying fits and all these things. And then I've got older kids who are like, they deal with it by just kind of withdrawing because they don't know how.
Yeah.
Or they just kind of step around it.
Yeah.
And I feel awful for them because I'm like, you shouldn't have to be dealing with this.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that I couldn't find a way to fix it.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you do there.
Yeah.
I honestly just don't know how to handle it. And I wish I had some wise Yoda of my own to kind of like go to and be like, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
Because I still pray. I mean, this is like, I wrote one of my recent posts was an agnostic who prays. I pray all the time.
Yeah.
A lot of it is angry prayer.
Yeah.
I'm like, I trusted you.
Yeah. So for you, what does having lost your faith look like? I mean, you pray, you don't go to church, I assume, or do you still, you don't go?
I mean, occasionally I do. Occasionally I'll go. I went more when I was traveling. When I was basically shown the door last September, I went on a road trip for a couple months because I knew that if I tried to stay local, I would lose my mind. I have always done road trips and I find them very helpful for contemplation, and I think beauty is, you know, a salve that soothes many wounds. And so I went looking for nature, but I also went looking for companionship, you know. So I stopped and visited friends in Virginia. I stopped and visited friends in Pennsylvania. I stayed with Kale for 2 weeks in Rhode Island. And then I spent a lot of time staying with a couple of priests, one in Michigan and one in Chicago, who I only knew through online. I'd never met them. Do you know who Father Joseph Krupp is? Joe and Black Ministries, and yeah.
I had to look him up. Maybe because his name was in your blog or something. I didn't know who
he's great.
He was.
He's kind of internet famous. Like, you know, he does a podcast a couple times a week. He's really funny, and he's just a really good guy, right? But we'd never met. And the thing is that our contact began when I was sort of a hardcore traditionalist, and he was very, like, Vatican II kind of whatever goes kind of priest comparatively to what I was used to. And, like, we shouldn't have gotten along. We should have clashed. But I remember him reaching out to me back in those days, and he's like, I know you're my brother. Like, I just know it. And so we've kept up a kind of private correspondence over the years. And when I told him this was happening, he's like, you can come stay here as long as you want. So I stayed with him twice. The first time was a couple weeks, and the next time I stayed for like a month. I just lived with him and his dad. He takes care of his 89-year-old dad. And so I had a lot of opportunities to, like, he had a chapel in the house, in the rectory, and, you know, mass is right there. I stayed with a priest in Chicago, and, you know, it's like, I'm right here. I'll go. I'll see if I feel anything. I'll see if anything comes of it. Yeah. It's not that I'm opposed to it. It's that I don't have conviction about it anymore. Yeah. I won't say a creed that I don't know that I can 100% put myself behind. Yeah. And so it's like, it's almost like a different thing than a loss of faith straight up. It's almost like a complete reconfiguration of my epistemology. Yeah. If there's, you know, like I needed to be able to think for myself. I needed to be able to ask questions. I needed to be able to object to things. I remember feeling like the faith was like a suffocating girlfriend where you couldn't say, hey, I need time to figure out if this is right. Because in Catholicism, you can't stay home on Sunday because you're not feeling it. It's a mortal sin. You know, that obligation is relentless. And so it's like the parish we were going to in Phoenix, it was really, really beating me down before I left. It was in the worst part of the city. It was an hour away from where we lived. We would go down there and there's drug addicts everywhere. And then the parish was too small. So all the big families almost always wound up in the parish hall watching mass on television, not in the church itself. And because of the Eucharist and everything, like you kneel during the consecration, my kids are kneeling in front of TVs. Like anthropologically, what is this teaching them? You know, we're one of the fastest growing parishes in the diocese, but the bishop, despite being known as a good bishop, isn't doing anything to help us. He's still demanding, you know, that we give him a huge amount, 6 figures worth of money from the parish for his annual appeal. The pastor's kissing his ass from the pulpit because he's trying to maintain a good relationship with the bishop. And the homilies are insultingly condescending because the guy just wasn't that good at his job. And he's a young guy. Like, you know, so we're there and I'm getting angrier and angrier every Sunday. I'm angry because of my work. I'm angry because I'm like, why is this what I have to do? Why do I have to, for 17 years, I've driven my family long distances to crappy neighborhoods to try to give God the best thing that we can. Why don't I get to go to the parish? It's 5 minutes from my house without it being a boomer freak show. Like, why, if God really wants this from us, why does he make it so freaking hard to get? You know, it's not like it was year 1 or year 2, it was over time. And the number of times we've been screwed over on sacraments because priests were like, oh, we'll do traditional sacraments. And then the last minute they changed their mind. Like all these things. And so that was kind of what happened at that parish is during COVID, the Bishop of Phoenix gave a dispensation. Nobody has to be at Mass on Sunday. And I was like, good, because I need a minute. Because feeling like I'm sinning to get the space I need to stop being so angry is a problem for me. I need that space. So we weren't going. We were taking care of my elderly father-in-law. He was living with us for much of that time. And so, you know, we didn't know what COVID was going to do to him. Like, I had asthma as a kid. I was a little worried about it. I was like, I don't know. Nobody knew in the early days, right? So I was like, why not stay home? And then I can actually watch something on TV where I get a good homily instead of, you know, this 3rd grade crap that I'm getting, this chicken soup for the soul crap that I'm getting at my parish. And so I was trying to kind of reconstitute a foundation because I felt it getting really rocky.
Yeah.
And then, we had a baby during that time, which we didn't expect because we had a big gap, at a 5-year gap where we didn't think we were going to have another kid. And then we asked, can we get baptism for him? And my then 8-year-old son hadn't gotten his first communion. We're like, can we get those two things? We founded this parish. Like, we were there at the beginning when the first priest who was there was being run out of town on a rail by the members of the Society of St. Pius X, who are, whether they're schismatic or not, nobody, but they're the Latin Mass competition. And they made his life miserable. And he would come live with our family. He would stay with us. So this priest from the Fraternity of St. Peter, we were like family. And that parish started kind of out of that relationship, largely out of that beginning. And this priest now, who was in high school when that happened, is, deciding he's going to boss us around and tell me that we're not going to raise our kids in the faith because we weren't there during COVID. That was what ended up happening. And I just lost it. I was like, the marriage thing, a miracle that I thought was a miracle that ended up not being one, that everything I was covering in the church, like, it all kind of came together in a perfect storm. And I just remember hitting this point where I'm like, I don't even care. Like, hell feels like a gun to my head. But there comes a point where if you're in a hostage situation, you just look at the guy and you're like, either shoot me or let me go. But I can't listen to you talk anymore. I'm not sitting in this room for another minute. And that was what it felt like. I was just like, I'm walking away from a hostage situation because I can't take it anymore. It's not like this priest, this pastor, ever once asked me, hey, what's going on? Why aren't you here? Are you okay? He just made an arbitrary judgment of like, you're not going to raise your kids in the faith because you weren't here during COVID. I didn't ask you any questions about it. So I'm just not going to give sacraments to your little kids. And it just triggered my protector instinct. And it triggered my outrage and indignation. And I was like, no, I'm not playing your game. Knock it off. You have no canonical right to do this. Like, this is not how the church works. And it's not the first time I've had to explain to him how theology works because he's not very bright. So I just got fed up. And I said, I can't do it anymore. And something in me snapped. But there was another piece to this, because so much of my life and the difficulties of my marriage were coming from a place of anger that I did not realize was unmetabolized trauma. My dad was super, super angry, and he took almost all of it out on me. And I ended up repeating those behaviors. Now, he didn't know what his traumas were. I'm not bashing him. It's just he was who he was. And he was terrifying to me. So I had repeated a lot of that same stuff. And I remember getting to this point where I was like, it was around 2020. So it was during, the beginning of COVID, where I was like, if I die tomorrow, are my kids going to be relieved or are they going to be sad? I need them to know more than anything else that I love them. That's it. And I have all these ideas about patriarchy and the respect that I'm owed and head of the household and all this stuff, that comes from the cultural religious surroundings that I'm in and the other guys that I'm talking to who believe the same things that I believe. But this isn't who I want to be. Why am I being this guy? Why am I being this overbearing, angry man who, I remember growing up hearing from members of the family, oh, your kids have to fear you like we fear God. Like all these things that were just bouncing around in the back of my head. I was making my family afraid of me because I thought it was my job to keep them in line that way. No. And it obviously did huge damage to my marriage, but it was doing damage to my kids and to me. And I hit this point around that same time where I was just like, no, I'm done. I'm not taking those themes anymore and weaponizing them against my family. I love them. I want them to know that I love them. And I just made a commitment from that point on. I wasn't going to be that guy anymore. And, I haven't been perfect, but I made huge progress. Unfortunately, my kids can see that progress, but my wife can't. She's too caught up in the stuff that's happened over the many years that she's had to put up with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. I'll just tell you that. There's obviously very little I could do about it, but I'm sorry. I'm sorry for your pain, and and you know this better than I do, for all of the things that will continue to work through at all of the different levels as you go forward. But I will pray that there is hope in new beginnings, because you have some space now, hard as it may be. You have some space now to, the gun is not to your head, at least. The gun is not to your head. And you are, in some ways, you do have some of that freedom now. And I think that's a good thing.
I don't mean to squander it. I mean,
no.
Something that I tell my boys, because my older boys especially, really struggle with belief too.
Yeah.
And I didn't know until they start, like, I asked them and they articulated, like, for a lot of the same reasons that I do.
Yeah.
They're just things intellectually, they're just like, I can't reconcile this. It doesn't make sense. So what I tell them constantly is, I'm like, you do not have the luxury of being lazy about this. You can't just say, I don't think I believe it, and then just walk away. Because if it's true and you're wrong, it's the most consequential mistake you'll ever make. And I was like, I know that you see me struggling with this, and you know I've walked away, but you don't know, like, how much I interrogate myself, how much I try to find out what the truth is. I'm not a materialist. There's too many things in the world that I can't explain that way. I talk to God every day, to the place where God feels like he should be, where I always talked to that place. I don't feel like he's picking up the phone. I don't know if there's anybody on the other end. But in the chance that there is, I'm sending that signal saying, what is all this? Why is this happening this way? Yeah. Because I'm not glib or content or happy with being the man who lost his faith. And like I said in something I wrote recently, I don't even know if it's true to say, strictly speaking, that I lost my faith. I lost my faith in the Catholic Church, and because of the way I was formed, like, that was the totality of what being faithful was. Now, I don't know for sure that I believe in Christianity. I don't know for sure that I find that story fully compelling. I feel like I see holes in it, but it's like, but if it's true, my prayer is always, and has been for years now, even since before I lost it, God, help me see what I'm missing. Why am I having such a hard time with this? Yeah. Like, if it's true, I want to know what's true, and I want to believe what's true. I just can't get to the feeling of, like, I'm sure that it is. Yeah. Yeah. And I know there's a point probably where people have to take a leap, but it's like, I already lived there for 43 years. I've been 5 years on the outside trying to reconfigure this epistemology, this approach to things. And I have realized that the Catholic epistemology is so closed. We have an answer for freaking everything. And when you have an answer for everything, you lose your ability to interrogate what's real and what's not, what's true and what's not, what's exaggerated and what's not. And it breaks your ability to accept new information. And, I don't want to go off on a weird tangent, but, like, one of the reasons why Kale and I, we talk about this UAP thing all the time is because it's like, it's not my job to say, I know that this is something else. I know that this is demons. I know that this is extraterrestrials. It's my job to say, hey, new information is coming in and it's interesting and it defies what it is I thought I understood about the universe. How about I take some time with that and figure out what it actually means, instead of, begging the question right at the outset and saying, well, it can't be that because I believe this. That is the thing that drives me crazy. And I realized that everything I was doing was rooted in, well, the church teaches, ergo, and it's like, well, where am I in any of that? Like, what is my role? What do I believe? I know what they believe. I know what they believe. And so I'm a weird case in a way when it comes to the loss of faith. I have lost the external practice and devotion of the faith. I have lost conviction in the Christian narrative, but I haven't lost the feeling that, hey, a universe with God is a pretty crazy and awful thing. And I don't think it's one I want to live in.
Yep. I think I haven't made a lot of videos about this, but I do think that I talked to Kale a little bit when I was just in Austin, Texas, and I did a live stream from the hotel room, and I did a little bit of monologuing before that. I think what we're about to go through is important, and it's not disconnected from what's been happening in terms of epistemology that we've been working through for the last 30, 40 years.
When you say what we're about to go through, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, Kale has, it's not just UAPs. I talked about this a little bit yesterday, the day before. The modernist assumption about the way we know things is that the world is flat and it's a landscape of public facts that anyone has access to, and so the world is flat and it's universally approachable and accessible. That's the assumption, and that's never been true. And the way that the unreality of that was compensated for in modernity was a separation between public and private faith, often sort of trying to connect like the objective and subjective. But subjective was always a dismissible throwaway. You can have that for your own internal life to the degree that you find it satisfying, but there's no place for it in the public world. And even, regardless of, what is disclosed over the next year, 5 years, 10 years, the nature of disclosure, in that it is in fact knowledge that is not public. It is knowledge that we have every reason for it to be true, but it is not universally accessible. That part of what's happening with the recession of modernity is that this is going away, and this part of this has to do with the Jordan Peterson Peugeot Vervaeke thing that I was involved in earlier. Once they figured out that what you're experiencing through your eyes is not what you think it is, that in fact there is a whole world of cognition that is prior to this manifest image that you have before you, that there are whole ranges of things we don't see and can't see, even though others can see it, and that is normal in this world, and that in many ways the history that we have been told for the last few centuries is full of certain kinds of assumptions that suggest that, I read Carlos Ayre's book, They Flew, and found that to be a refreshing piece of literature, even though I, as the inheritance of Dutch Calvinism, should dismiss the idea that this little self-emaciated monk was flittering about. And
it's pretty hard to take.
Yeah, but there's no reason to say it didn't happen except to maintain your worldview. And, I sit in an interesting place with respect to those conversations. But a lot has happened since the Protestant Reformation to Protestants. And in many ways, I think that there are many reasons why the walls that divided Catholics from Protestants have to a great degree come down, because that which many people share is much more considerable than what sort of kept them apart. So, I've got hours and hours and hours of me talking about that on the internet.
No. But okay, I'm going to ask you really quick. Are you familiar with Donald Hoffman?
Yes.
Okay, because I keep beating that drum with Kale, and I don't know if he's watched any of his stuff. But this idea that we have this limited headset that shows us reality, but it's only the slice of reality we need to see to survive.
Yeah.
Because we didn't evolve to see the other parts. Whatever people think about evolution or not, it's like, well, I don't need to believe everything that Darwin said to know that a pit viper can see thermal and I can't. Or to see, there are layers to actual reality that are measurable and observable, but we don't have the sensory apparatus to take it in.
Right.
It tells us there could be any number of things going on in reality that we're just not aware of because We didn't develop the ability to perceive it.
Yeah. I picked up this story from, I forget the name of the author. People in the corner want me to find him, but he went into the jungles of the Amazon as an evangelical missionary. He lost his faith, but there's this poignant scene at the beginning of his book where he's there with his child, living in this missionary village, trying to learn the language so he can translate the Bible for them. And a god appears on the other side of the river, and the whole town is there. There's the god, and he and his daughter are looking, and they can't see the god, and everybody else in town sees the god. So, what do you say about that?
Yeah.
Or is everyone in town a liar? Is it some collective illusion? And as someone who is a Protestant minister, who, my job every week is the homily, to deal with questions of, what on earth is happening in this strange book called the Bible? And every week I have the privilege of exploring that with a very patient and compliant tiny congregation that somehow continues to love me despite the fact that, I go on these strange twists in my life now with, a whole group of internet people, some of whom show up at church, and the people at church are like, they're used to it now, but what is happening to our pastor? So, That
just means you're one of the real ones. Like, you got, I can't hang out with people who don't ask these questions anymore. I don't know how to deal with superficial, we're not going to go any deeper than the axioms we already accept. It's like, there's so much stuff out there that challenges us, and we don't know how to answer it. And I admit, I have a hell of a time trying to live with mystery. I'm not good at it. I want to solve every mystery like I'm the Bloodhound Gang, right? But it's like, the thing about mystery is you don't always get to the bottom of it, but you also can't just preclude it because you can't.
Right. One of the things I think I learned well from my father, so my father was also a Christian Reformed minister. He was a big devotee of C.S. Lewis, sort of this intellectual renaissance that happened in the Christian Reformed Church and Calvin College, a magazine called the Reformed Journal that happened in the mid to late 20th century for the CRC. But he was very comfortable. He was an urban missions church planter, pastor, just outside of New York City, where I grew up. Spent 36 years there. But he was.
So we're both New Yorkers.
Yeah,
I'm from upstate.
Yeah, you're from upstate. But it was, well, no, I'm from New Jersey. Have you ever been to Paterson, New Jersey?
I think I've been through there. I mean, I'm a Giants fan, so there's that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I did get from my father is a comfortability with not knowing. And when something is out there, I'm fine with it being out there and not knowing it. And now that's a complex emotional dynamic, because you actually do need sort of a real deep ballast to be comfortable with the unknown out there, to have it not freak you the hell out, because unknown things can kill you. That is just real. So I got that from my father, who I think was quite good at it, and he had a very interesting ministry of dealing with drug addicts. And basically Paterson, New Jersey was one of these really awful cities in New Jersey where immigrants would come and grimy industry would take advantage of them, and African Americans came up after sort of the European spigot was turned off by the First World War. And so 1960 he came there, and it was job to turn what had been sort of this little mission into a real church. And so I was born in 63, and so that was the 18 years of my growing up just sitting with drug addicts in church. And that was normal to me. And so, and partly because of, I think, the stability of my parents and the goodness of my parents, I could sit with drug addicts in church, and it was okay. Nobody molested me. Nobody threatened me. The drug addicts were working their way out. It was a very good struggling little community. And so then to have all of my maps formed in that period
Yeah.
created me. And I'm extremely fortunate to have had that. So any questions you have? I mean, I don't have a time limit here either, so you can ask anything you want or as much as you want. And if there's something I can't answer on the air, I'll turn off the camera and I'll tell you privately.
No, I don't. I didn't come with questions because I figured I'd be the one answering them. So I just, like I said, I kind of came in blind and thought, you know what? Let's see what this is. Let's see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, I'd have to say that part of I blogged in. I was sort of, I came back from missionary service here in Sacramento. I eventually start blogging, just denominational stuff mostly. The church was just on a long, slow decline. And so I was involved in denominational things. We did a lot of church planting in Sacramento because things were booming here. And then when the Jordan Peterson stuff started happening, I saw, basically, I often say it this way, for years I saw people going down the deconstruction road. And they were going to new atheism or yoga or new age stuff. And then around Jordan Peterson, I saw people starting to come back down that street. And I thought, that's important.
There's something going on there, yeah.
And so I tried to entice colleagues and friends of mine to pay attention with me and talk this through with me, and most of them would say, I'm going to watch 2 hours of this guy on YouTube. I'm a busy pastor. I'm not pastoring a dying church. I don't have the luxury of time like you have, or at least the sort of like you. If I see something, I can't sort of let it go.
Right.
And so then I decided to make a video about it because I was reading Neil Postman at the time and thinking, there's something about YouTube and this new media with this. And so I made a video. And then what I was unprepared for was, something that you had learned earlier with respect to blogging, the power of the internet. And then suddenly all sorts of people start beating a path to my door, and they just want to talk.
It's weird to be internet famous.
It is weird.
Like, I've been recognized in grocery stores. Like, I've had just random things happen, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Like, this has nothing to do with anything. Like, I'm just going to shop, It hasn't happened in a while, but it used to.
You want just a little bit of it, though. You don't want Jordan Peterson famous. You want just a little bit.
It's too much. Actually, when I was a kid, I said I wanted to be an actor growing up. I always loved doing voices and impressions and things like that because, I don't know. I don't think I liked being me, and I liked the idea of playing something else. But the thing that actually steered me away from going down that road, not like I had any offers or anything, but I was like, if I become famous, my life will not be mine. I can't just go to a movie. I can't just go to the store. Like, that would drive me crazy to not just be able to be wherever and have nobody know who I am.
Yep.
And I got a taste of that, where I, for a long time, I couldn't go to a traditional Latin Mass parish anywhere in America without people recognizing me. I got recognized in multiple grocery stores, we had a lot of readers. Our podcast, the podcast we did for 1 Peter 5, had about 10,000 subscribers at the time, which wasn't terrible. But, I was one of the first to do high-res video podcasts using this exact camera, in fact. This is from those days. This is like a $5,000 camera setup because I was like, we're going to make it look like TV. We're going to make it look as good as we possibly can because let's keep the level of quality high. And so it's like you kind of become a TV persona a little bit just because you're on YouTube and enough people are watching it. It's weird.
So what happens is I start just talking to a lot of people, and I'm just doing that on Skype and Zoom. This is before COVID, so I was well acquainted with Zoom. And then people would ask me, what did you tell me? And then it's like, I can record this and I'll send you the recording. And then I began to get enough repetition with conversations that I said to some appropriate conversations, can I share this on my channel? And what that did was change the dynamic because suddenly what had been sort of a personality thing now started to become a community.
That's such an interesting progression.
Yeah.
Actually, will you tell me about TLC? Because I don't even know what it is. And Kale mentions it all the time, and then you mention it when you reached out to me, and I'm like, I could look this up, or I could ask you, and I'm asking.
So what became very clear as a pastor, if one of the things that you learn early as a pastor is someone will come into your church and you might preach a good sermon or something, or they need something, or something happens. So it's almost always for their own reasons. And first they connect with you.
Mm-hmm.
But very quickly it's like, I'm the pastor. I will be friends, but it'll be a weird friendship probably because I am playing a role here. And so the real job of a pastor is not to just attract people to listen to your sermons, but to knit people together into a community. So the Jordan Peterson thing happens, and I very quickly realize that I don't have enough time to deal with all these people. And what they need is community. And so we start local meetups, Jordan Peterson meetups, and then I start a chain of them. Then Jordan Peterson gets sick, and the Jordan Peterson conversation is sort of bottoming out. People just get to be like Grieving sharing. And so then we needed something else. And so then one guy was really leaning into me because everybody wanted me to start a thing. Mm-hmm. In Catholic land, it would be some, legionnaires. I mean, to use that name, it's like, Legionnaires of Christ. Wow. Knights of Columbus. I mean, you Catholics, you got some wild names out there.
We're into the militant imagery.
I guess so. But people wanted me to start a thing. And I'm like, I don't want to start a thing that's, Paul Vanderklay Ministries. I don't want that. Right. And I'm not trying to remanufacture Christianity. I'm not trying to change it at all. I'm just doing what I do as a pastor. So what happened was I said, what I'd really love is the image that I have in my mind is estuary. Because I live in California where the water comes out of the mountains and meets the sea, and you get these really wonderful tidal pools, estuaries, that are tremendously vibrant. But they're neither fresh nor salt, and they sort of go back and forth. And so myself and a friend in Southern California developed what we call the Estuary Protocol, and we started transitioning these Jordan Peterson meetups into estuary groups, which would be, by design, highly open conversations for people who just needed a space where they could listen. They needed a community of discovery. In many ways, that's sort of what it is. And so now we've got about 100 of these groups around the world. So that was sort of the in real life thing, which is really important.
Yes, it is.
But the online thing, so I started doing these randos, and there would be things like I would then start talking to a person who had been in the comment section. Mm-hmm. And then people start knitting this together. That, you know what? We want to talk to each other. We've been through some things, and we need to hear each other, and we need to be seen. And so, but very quickly, because of how the internet works, and because this wasn't just Paul Vanderklay putting out a podcast, this was Paul Vanderklay taking people started to copy me. And they started launching their own channels. And they also started doing some similar things as what I did, but some different things that were unique to them. And so then, Grim Grizz starts doing his kinds of things. And
which is a category all its own.
Sam Tiedemann. So Sam Tiedemann was a biblical Unitarian who he was in many ways like an evangelical who just kept getting bounced from churches because he couldn't sign on to the Trinity. It was a little bit salty about it, but also super smart guy. Mm-hmm. And I remember when he first came up, it was so interesting because it was like 1,700 years of Christian formation just kind of reared its head. And I watched it happen on the internet, and I thought, that's interesting. I was talking to this wonderful Roman Catholic woman who had left a Jehovah's Witnesses, and she was a grandma, and she's kind and loving. And this Unitarian shows up, and it's like claws came out. It's like, what's happening here? And
the ragtag collection of heretics, basically.
Yes.
Right?
Well, that's exactly what it became known for, is that Paul Vanderklay and his merry band of heretics became quickly the thing because in YouTube land, everyone expected me to be a dogmatic Dutch Calvinist and to take
Yeah.
on all comers in a friendly chat room and to own everyone else. And I didn't and wouldn't do that because people are more important than theology.
That's awesome. That is a great line.
You know, theology was not, man was not made for theology. Theology was made for humanity.
Yeah.
And
Tell that to any Thomist you meet, though. Good God.
Well, yeah. So what happened was that a culture developed. And because I'm still a local church pastor, I have limited hours in the day to do this kind of thing, despite the fact that I have a small and very accommodating congregation. This thing began to grow. And so it was sort of the confluence of both the TLC, which was sort of initially kind of, Peterson went away, and so Peugeot and Vervaeke really climbed up the status hierarchy. Me, not so much, because I wasn't as close to Jordan. So Jordan was casting all of it kind of attention to Peugeot and Vervaeke, but the three of us began talking about things. And so initially the TLC was sort of the three of us downstream from Jordan Peterson. But Peugeot sort of started the symbolic world. He started his thing. Vervaeke started the Vervaeke Foundation. It was his thing. And so the TLC, this land of misfits, was sort of the left behinds of that moment, but always in small spaces. So much of this is, as I've watched it develop over these last 8 years, what you described in terms of where you're at right now. So many people in this space are there. They might not all be divorced. Many of them aren't. Many of them are single. But they are men who, for one reason or another, don't have a lot of friends. Some are on the spectrum, and friendship is difficult. Some are, they're busy maintaining a family, or they're busy trying to keep a job down, or they're busy in a marriage. And for some of them, it's a very difficult marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And they're isolated. They're isolated by their bad marriage. They're isolated by the demands of fatherhood. They're isolated by their autism. They're isolated by all of this. And what we sort of found a way to do was to build friendships through the internet.
Right.
And because female friendships tend to be face-to-face, male friendships tend to be side-to-side, the internet works fairly well with this because our friendships are building as we're building other things together. And so the space has sort of become a maker space. We're having all kinds of interesting projects, but it is a place where there's a public aspect of it, but fortunately for us, most of the channels are very small. And
so is it a network of channels?
There's a lot of metaphors because we keep trying to figure out is a flotilla. So we're sort of on the sea, and we're sort of ships together, and it's channels, but not everybody has a channel. There's some people that don't have channels, but they show up on live streams.
It's a gypsy archipelago.
Yeah. And it's kind of so Jacob Federecci, who was in early, who's a very interesting character, he made his way to Sacramento once, and he sat me down at a restaurant, and he said, "I know what you should do." I said, "Okay, what?" Everybody's got ideas for my life. He says, "You should start the Trinity Broadcast Network," which you might not know what that is, but I'm sure there are Catholic equivalents. And I said, "You're out of your mind. These are blue-haired, crazy, charismatic, prosperity gospel people who have this crazy cable network, which is 24/7.
Yeah.
And that's in some ways not prosperity gospel-y, but and very metagelical, including skeptics and what have you. But we're getting towards 24 hours because there are like early morning shows now, and it's all sort of ad hoc. And there's not much organization to it. We've got a lot of discovery issues. But it is a fraternity and a fellowship and a community of mostly male friendships.
This is very kind of cyberpunk in a way. Like it's very, like the future made something possible that wasn't possible before.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it's fascinating. What does TLC stand for? It's an acronym?
So back during the Peugeot Vervaeke days, Sevilla King basically said this little corner of the internet, which is not a unique thing, but it was the thing that sort of coalesced as our flag and
I
as our
see.
name, how we
I
could
see.
find each other. And that thing itself has been debated, and you know it's been a wild journey, but it has continued to grow. Plus, so there's a couple in Canada who are both therapists. They wanted to do a conference in Thunder Bay, and they had invited Peugeot and Vervaeke, and then they invited me, and so we did this conference just right when we could have Canada let us do it, and that then set a template. And then we did another because then I came back from that, and my buddy from Southern California, John Van Donk, was like, "What's next?" I said, "We need to do more conferences because these estuary groups need to be fed by the conferences." But then John, who planned the second one in Chino, said, "We not only need to do more conferences, we need to stop doing conferences like everyone else does. And what we're going to do is the conference is going to sort of be people will come and pay a little bit of money to go see a celebrity and hear a talk. That's sort of the conventional side of the conference. But the other side of the conference is that we're going to break them up into cohorts that they're going to maintain throughout the conference, and they're going to run through the estuary protocol here. And what that has done is because many of the best stories. So I started doing these Randos conversations, and only about half of them could be shared on the internet because
Hmm.
most of them were pastoral style conversations where people had a sad story to tell and
Hmm.
needed someone to listen. And so what happened with the estuary groups is that they're not trauma bonding by any means. There's much more explanation, but because they're off camera and because they're small and partly because of the culture that developed in the space, when people come to these conferences, it's like there's no small talk.
Mm.
I now have a chance to bond with these total strangers that I
Interesting.
trust because I've been watching this thing on the internet, and I have a fair degree of certainty that if I disclose something that I desperately need someone else to know about, someone else in this group will have experienced something close enough to that, and they will be around me, and they're not going to shoehorn me into Catholicism or Orthodoxy or Calvinism or Christianity or anything like that, but they're going to be with me, and they might even be helpful for me to figure out maybe what I should do next.
What's really wild listening to you describe this is going back to the beginning of the show where you told me that you met Kale because of me. Kale met me because I was floundering in my last year at 1 Peter 5, and I was wrestling with stuff publicly. And I get this email from this guy who, at the time, his profile picture on Twitter, I kid you not, he looked like a bearded Jonah Hill. Like, it was a terrible, terrible picture. I thought he was some young guy. I didn't know who the heck he was. And he had a weird name. And I was like I knew I had interacted with him a couple times, but you get your reply guys who are cool and you get the ones that are annoying. And he was a cool one. And I was like, okay. So he sends me this email and he's like, I think maybe you're approaching this question all wrong. He's like, have you heard of the IDW? Like, and he starts going into Peterson and the Weinsteins and, all this stuff. And he kind of and he's since told me, in fact, I think we just talked about this on our last show. He's like, I never cold email people. Like, I just don't do it. He's like, but something in me told me to email you this thing. And it came at a moment where I was grasping for a lifeline because I was like, the church thing is not supporting me anymore. Like, my faith is cracking hard. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in pieces until all of a sudden, like, the rock slide finishes, right? And so I've had people accuse me of like, oh, how long did you hold on to this, so you could make money before I was like, dude, I was trying to find somebody to take over the publication, for the better part of a year. And when the first person that came, even though, it was probably worth more, I took it because I don't believe in doing something for my own benefit that I no longer believe in. I can't do that, right? So, but what Kale did is, I had Peterson's book. I just hadn't read it. Like, I picked it up, I read a chapter, I was like, I had read it a couple years before. But Kale put it back in front of me again. And he was like, I think you need to approach this differently. I think maybe you need to think about this differently. The email was years ago, so I don't remember the specifics of it. But I just remember sitting there reading that email. I even called my wife and I'm like, read this. I'm like, this is the answer. Like, this is what I needed. And so he gave me, inadvertently, through doing that, a meaning structure to hold on to when the one that I had was collapsing, so that I didn't wind up completely adrift. And then on top of that, the first time he and I met in person, he invited me to come see Peterson live with him in Providence, Rhode Island. And so we'd been corresponding for a while. And so I drove out there and we met up for the first time and we went to see Peterson. And it's like, and he's the friend I have who's like genuinely Catholic, but also never pushy, never like even goes, like he just doesn't even bring it up, like we'll talk about it contextually, but never for a minute have I felt like I'm being judged or anything like that. Like, he gets what I'm going through and he can talk openly about what he thinks is going on. And I'm the guy who left, but I'm like more orthodox than he is in terms of like the way I look at the faith. I'm like, but you can't say that. You can't believe that. The church teaches this. He's like, what are you talking about? And so we have this perfect kind of like, I don't know. It feels like it's a smaller version of exactly what you're talking about.
Yep.
But it happened kind of all on its own.
Yep.
That's so funny.
That's a great way to say it. It is a smaller version of what we're talking about.
And he is the only lasting friend I have made since college. All of my other friends are people from high school and college. That's it. Like, I've made a couple of friendships over the years that have been kind of transitory because somebody was in a parish or whatever else, but then we don't stay in touch. Kale is the only friend I have made that I know in real life. I have a couple of longtime internet friends, who I've never met, and I've known them for over 20 years, which is in and of itself, it's such a strange modern phenomenon.
Yeah.
But Kale is the only like real rooted friendship that I have had in the last 25 years. And it's crazy to me.
Yeah. So that is a taste of what is happening in this network. And yesterday, it was so funny because yesterday there's this guy, Jim Bob, he picked up some of my videos. He's an ortho bro and he's just, doing his thing and on his channel. And so I was watching a little bit of that. And then there was Chad, who's another sort of pillar here in the corner, Chad is an amazing guy. Chad started out sort of a little chaotic. He recovering alcoholic, been through AA. Eventually, he wanted to go try Catholic, but his wife was like, she grew up Catholic or something like that, so she's like, no. So then they did Lutheran, and but he was they just had a baby about 8-9 months ago. And so she's sleeping, and so he'll often just live stream, and he'll just pick up a guitar, and he'll start strumming. He'll turn on StreamYard, and then some people will wander in, and they'll just have, of course, there may be 5 or 10 or 15 people watching who are commenting in, and they'll just have a conversation about, it could be about what's happening with kids, or it could drift into much more serious questions, the likes of which we've talked about today. And so what?
So is it a two-way conversation
Yes.
like this, or is it just he's doing it and he's
Well,
reading
he starts.
or...
He might be just sharing some things on his mind, but then all of these liturgies have developed in the last 8 years. So one of the liturgy is dropping the link. So when someone drops the link, that means anybody can come on, and then you're gonna have a conversation because the channels are small. 1, 2, 3 people might come on. It's not overwhelming. There's not 1,000 people in the stupid thing, and then people get to know each other, and then the conferences and the get-together. So I just went down to Austin because this Orthodox church wanted me to do an adult education thing, which was interesting in and of itself. But Austin had started an estuary, and it was going strong. And so when they start an estuary, if they invite me, I'll usually come down because I'll pull people out of the woodwork. And so they had about 50 people there for the estuary, and so they broke up into 4 groups. But then we had a party the next evening, and it's just this wonderful couple. She's they're both now Byzantine Catholics, but he'd grown up Protestant, and his father was there, and he's Presbyterian, but now Episcopalian, and it's just, and what's beautiful is that people don't come just to see me.
Yeah.
Because they've met people in the comments section, and they've seen people online, and so, or they've done a rando with me, or one of the other channels, they've sort of told their story, and so, yeah, they might shake my hand and say thank you, but they really want to talk to Grim Grizz.
You know what's funny is I got invited by one of your guys to do a rando last week, and he's like, you should really get on with Paul if you can. He's like, but if you want to come on my show, and I'm like, actually, I'm already on the calendar. Like, it's just a question of, getting it recorded. But I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. So that's the liturgy, and that's how it goes. And people always ask, well, what is the TLC? And then some people who have been watching that, how do I get in? And it's, I can tell you, it's sort of like getting into a church in that, I always tell people, if you really want to get into a church, what you really have to do is just keep showing up, for one thing. But then you figure out participation. But then you can even if you're showing up and participating, there's always a question of how in are you? And it's a very organic, subtle thing where someone sort of, they show up enough, they participate, but they're really in when they sort of find their space, they find their niche, their identity finds them, and then everybody knows them as that. And then as the years go on, I was just thinking the other day, because I remember all these characters 7-8 years ago and when they all came in. And some of them were kind of raggedy. And I look at them now and it's like they're mature, they're more stable, they're happier, they have this network of friends. They have a life because of this thing for some of them.
Yeah.
And I think, I've not been a particularly successful local church pastor. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And neither was my father, which is interesting. Not in the way that he ever developed a big, large church, and after he would leave, the thing would sort of lose energy, and so on and so forth. But
because if you're the animating principle and everything revolves around you, then...
Right.
Yeah.
But what I see here, if I were to go away... I would be missed. I get that. But so much of the other good things, the friendship, the community, the traditions that are developing, the liturgies. And I told somebody early on, because he really wanted me to start a thing. And I told him I would rather found AA than Apple. Because if you found Apple, I'd be a billionaire by now, yada, yada, yada. It wouldn't be that successful. And it isn't as successful as AA, but it's more like what really touches my heart is when I can see someone find a life. And they're so, you shared your story here, and I would love to, it would be no comfort to you. I'd love to tell you that you are alone in this story, but you're not. And everybody this world is full of sad stories. And, it was very interesting as you described sort of what you did with this ghostwriting thing, especially when you were getting the free things and people had stories. In many ways, that's kind of what I've done here, because some people like you, I knew you were going to be a natural. You're going to be easy. I just have to sort of press a button and off you go, and it'll be wonderful. That's
shut
great.
Me up, yeah.
But there are a lot of people.
I got the hyperverbal autism.
That's right.
So.
A lot of people, I have to sort of midwife their story, and help pull it out and then reframe and help them craft it. But I had seen my father work years of lives of work years pastoring people, pastoring nobodies, and amazing stories these nobodies had.
Yeah.
And it was like, if the world could know. And so part of
full of stories.
Yes, and so part of the reason of doing randos was I don't want I want the world, if I can just give people a little glimpse and of the beauty that are in these stories. And then what happened with the TLC is people started getting glimpses of the stories. Not a lot. There's still a small section of the channel there. But, if I talk about Ortho Bros or something, you'll get all the clicks. But if I do a rando, a few hundred, but that's where the gold is, because then suddenly,
I know that feeling. I mean,
it.
even, as a publisher, as an editor, the stories often that meant the most to me got the least traffic.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is the most important.
Yeah.
But if I put something up about some scandal or some controversy, then I've got 30,000 hits on a post, and I'm like, what's wrong with everybody? And I just come for the car crash.
And I think what happened through this, and this is completely unintentional, I can't take credit for it, but through YouTube and then Zoom and StreamYard and all these tools, was the frustrating thing is when you write a story, your audience bonds with the character, but they don't have access to this person. Now suddenly, people had access to the others.
Yeah.
And
it's huge.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you remember what it was like when you would listen to a radio DJ all the time, and then you would finally see an interview of him, and you're like, he doesn't look anything like what I thought he would look like based on his voice, kind of a thing. When I started doing the podcast for 1 Peter 5, people would be like, I had no idea that you were funny. I had no idea that, because I wrote about serious stuff all the time. Yeah. But my natural way of being is very self-deprecating and just kind of like making stupid jokes and doing stupid accents. And, it's why Kale and I start the show so many times in the German. Like, I've actually kind of pushed him into doing it without even thinking about it, because we are always doing so little bit of German. And I would just do these things, and they were just random because I'm weird, but it's like people didn't have a sense of who I was. They had a sense of who I was as a writer. And that is a facet, and it's real, but it's not the whole story. No. And so, yeah, that totally makes sense.
You are more real than your work, which in my opinion is the reason for the third commandment. The reason that the Lord says, don't take something of my product and confuse me with it. The creator is more than the creation.
Well, look, I mean, we've been talking about things like marriage and stuff, and it's like marriage is more than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And whenever it ends because one of the parts feels like they're not getting enough out of it, you're just like, but that's not the goal. The goal is it's something that transcends the individual.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's true about almost everything that matters.
Yeah.
It's always more than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
Like, if you separate the ingredients of some fancy French meal and try to eat them separately, like, what are you going to do? Munch on some flour? Like, eat a stick of butter? Chow down on some thyme? Like, no, but you put them all together and throw some wine in there, and it's magic, right? So it's like, I don't know. And so to me, by the way, this is always why sacramental theology was so fascinating. And it's interesting listening to you talk, because I don't have a lot of experience of Protestantism. My maternal grandmother was a convert from Methodism, and her family stayed Protestant. But I only knew her as a very devout Catholic. That was before I was born. Because my grandfather told her, I'm really serious about you, and if you're not willing to talk to a priest, we have to end this, because I need you to be the same faith as me. And she was actually willing. So but the community aspect of Protestantism through this conversation, at least, really stands out strongly to me. Whereas my experience of Catholicism, and maybe it wasn't always this way, but in my lifetime, it's more of a service model. It's like you go in to get an oil change, or you go into a doctor's visit. You're going in to get a certain service, a liturgical, ecclesiastical service rendered. And then you go home. Like, I'm there for the sacraments. I'm there for the obligation. I'm there, whatever. And maybe I get a little bit of choosiness because I go to a parish where a priest gives better sermons or whatever else. But I mean, traditionally, canonically speaking, you were supposed to go to your territorial parish and nowhere else.
Yeah.
That was the parish you automatically belonged to according to canon law. And so it was whatever you lived, within the boundaries of that parish. And so it was very regimented and structured, and I'm there to get this. I'm there to be, at the representation of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross at Calvary. I'm there to receive the Eucharist, and then I go home. And the community is a nice bonus if you've got it, but it's not the thing. Yeah. And in traditional Catholic land, man, the community thing is almost always the thing that gets lost, because what you have is a bunch of people coming from far away to go to the one place that has it. And then it's like they got to turn around and go home and haul all their kids home because this is, you already invested 3 hours in getting here and being here. And now you've got to turn around and go back and your whole Sunday is gone.
Mm.
And so people don't stick around and they don't have community, or, there's this one group of Augustinian canons out in West Virginia who I absolutely love. And the prior there has been through everything. I mean, his father was Jewish. He grew up Episcopalian. He wound up in the SSPX. Then he went to the fraternity. Then did all these things, right? But they're a Latin Mass community, young fledgling community, and he's an older guy. He's now, I think, in his 60s. So he's not young, but the guys who are with him are young. But I remember he told me one day, he's like, we're having a coffee hour after Mass, and you should stay. And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, listen, we don't do these very often because if we do, they turn into trad bitch sessions. So we're having one, you should stay. And I was like, okay, I gotcha. But it's like the community thing was always the thing that suffered. It was always the thing that suffered. And over time, you really feel that. And it's already like families are atomized.
Yeah.
And, and Catholics, and their aversion to contraception, like we tend to have big families, and then you move to wherever work is and you don't have the help of extended families and friends, and parishes don't help, and then you don't have a community, and the more isolated you are when you start having problems, the harder it is to solve them. So I think what you're doing sounds incredibly cool.
I'm deeply grateful for it. I certainly did not start out doing this. It just happened. And so
those are the best things. The best things are the ones that just happen.
Yep. Before I end the recording, do you want to pitch anything? Substack, tell people how to find you on Substack.
My Substack is called the Skojec File. Skojec is how you spell my name. It's just skojecfile.steveskojec.com. But it's easy enough to look up. Podcast is Monitoring the Situation on YouTube. And Kale and I are having a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, that's great.
In fact, I think we're going to record tomorrow. I don't even know what we're talking about. We got to figure that out. But yeah, we're that's become. It's funny because I did 80 some episodes of the One Peter 5 podcast. I wasn't super consistent about it because I was mostly editing the publication. But I did an episode with Kale, and it was by far the best episode. I think that. Because it was just such a natural conversation. And I think it was the first time he and I saw each other and got to talk. And it was just we just went for hours.
Yeah.
And I realized, oh man, I could interview this guy every week and it would be fine. So this has just become a continuation of that. And we joke about it all the time because it's there are days, when we're ready and we have an agenda. And there are days when our lives have been too busy and we're figuring out what we're going to talk about 10 minutes before. But it always works, and we always go too long. We have to cut it off because we're dude, we're going to hit 3 hours if we don't shut up. Which you and I are about to do. So.
Well, I don't have a problem with that. And Joe Rogan sort of broke the ice on that, so it's okay. I'm going to chop this up to smaller pieces, and people will watch. Some people will watch the smaller pieces, and some people will wait for the whole enchilada, which will come out.
And I'll say this too: if anybody wants to contact me directly, it's just steve@steveskojec.com. It's easy. Because people will leave comments or whatever. Just the most direct way is email.
Okay. Well, Steve, I sure appreciate it.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you having me on.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time, so I'm going to end the recording now.